the icon.
Let's talk common sense.
Well, I'm glad she kicked it off with a bang. Look at that. The excitement just rolled right out of Jen. Unfiltered Lucky, it's great to have you along with us again this evening. It's always fun to work with you, my friend. How you been?
I've been really good, man. Busy. It's always good to be here with you guys. I always appreciate it.
Well, I've been far from busy, so I'll toss it over to Jen, who's the busy bee of this house, and let her say her hellos, as she's much better at it than I am.
Oh, I'm supposed to talk this live?
Oh, and she says she's supposed to talk this live. Haven't you realized, Lucky, lately, when we bring Jen aboard, she's literally the voice of reason and the one that most people are excited to hear. They just kind of shush me, ask for me to scoot my way out of the screen and allow her to take over. So today is Jen and you're live. I'm just going to sit here.
All right.
What are we talking about today, guys? Anything exciting? Anything new?
What are we talking about today, AR?
Oh, great. I'm the leader of the pack. See how this goes? This is the one and only time. Okay, this is the one and only time. But you know what? I think Lucky, a part of this live, has to be diving into the hottest topic.
Me. Oh, sorry.
No, you're the hottest female that's on this live right now.
Sorry.
I don't know. I'm catching up. But the hot topic is May 15th is the deadline. Ann Taylor steps before Judge Hippler and has to present evidence if she wants to name names when it comes to the alternative perp defense in this case. And I think, Lucky, the one thing that I've noticed lately, and I've had to scratch my head about it, this is a big deal. I'm sure you would agree. Alternative perps has been on everybody's mind since the beginning of this case. Whether you truly believe Brian Koberger is involved, you still feel like there's potentially others involved alongside him, or there could be a whole rationale of other people that could be involved in this. Is that kind of your thinking in this case too, Lucky?
You know, I think you know my take. I've always felt like there was more than one person involved in this crime. I've felt like that from the very beginning. And I feel like just the amount of I just feel like one person committing this crime would have been extremely difficult. And I've always said, I mean, is it possible? Yes. But is it probable? I've just never felt like one person could have done this.
Well, and I at the end of the day, and the one thing I want to preface too, before we get into this conversation, and a lot of people are misunderstanding the fact there's a big difference between multi-perp and alternative perp, for one. That's a totally different discussion altogether. And then involved in that alternative perp, where the big issue for Ann Taylor is going to be, is do you just defend your client, Brian Koberger, with my client did not commit this crime, he's an innocent man, and then you present facts or evidence to prove your client didn't commit the crime? Or are you going to take that even a step further, which she's trying to do on May 15th, when she steps before Judge? What he expects of her is to bring evidence directly connected to someone else that committed this crime. Not specifically saying Brian Koberger didn't commit the crime. She's saying that person committed this crime. That's a big difference as well. I'm sure you would agree.
Right. Absolutely.
So, one of my biggest questions, and I'll start this off, and this is I'll ask both of you because you both have been not only involved in talking about this case from the beginning, but also researching and studying. Jen, not as much the research and the study, but she hears me talk about it all the time. You talk about it all the time. So she's got the gist of it. But at the end of the day, what evidence so far have you heard, Lucky, that directly connects anybody else to this crime scene where you can name names?
I don't know that I've heard anything concrete that would, that would lead me to believe that in any names, but, obviously the DNA that was in the house that was untested and the multiple, DNA, but just like the entire case, I don't think that we've seen anything concrete on either side. I haven't seen anything concrete, in my opinion, that links Brian Kohberger to this crime, and I haven't seen anything concrete that exonerates Brian Kohberger. So I feel like this entire crime is kind of up in the air. I don't really feel like we've seen a lot of concrete evidence that would allow us to draw a conclusion.
Well, I think that's the hard part is they've said many times that there's no connection even with Brian Kohberger. So to see if there's a connection with anybody else, we don't even have a concrete connection with the current suspect. So how can there be a connection with anybody else that could potentially be a suspect if they're not even finding the connection with him?
Right.
So let me take this to another, and this is a question again to both of you. So a little bit of the role I'm going to be playing today, everybody, is questioning and throwing out more and more questions. And based off of your guys' answers and the engagement that we get through the community, I'll kind of rotate through some more questions. But, let me preface this by saying this, Lucky. I've had the opportunity. I've stepped back a little bit, obviously, on the platform to try to get a little bit healthier, which has given me some space to avoid the overall discussions that are happening on YouTube and the various different scenarios that people are discussing. So I've been able to come within my own self and just take the things that I've researched, the things I've thought about, and dissect them a little bit more. And that's where some of these questions come from. I'm not saying anybody is guilty of anything at this point, because I'm a firm believer in innocent until proven guilty. And that goes across the board. Like, I won't point the finger at Brian Kohberger and say he's guilty. As I know you've probably known, Jen knows, people that have watched me know, I sat in the very courtroom with this man and did not get the feel of guilt from him. I did not get the feel of a violent person from him. And I'm a pretty good judge of character. I've been around some of these people long enough to be able to kind of gauge who would bring to the table. So let me preface it that way. But I do want to ask you, because you've just stated, in the totality of looking at this case, you haven't really found anything that's connected Brian Kohberger to this crime scene, just in the same, you in your opinion, haven't been able to connect the dots to somebody else, even though we've found other DNA samples, we've found these very important things that should have been investigated, should have been tested, should have got results, just like, oh, that's right. So one thing that connects Lucky Brian Kohberger to this crime scene is his DNA found at the crime scene. Do you agree with that? Or do you, I know it's a movable object. Don't get me wrong. I get it. It's movable. Are we still at the point of arguing that was his DNA, in your opinion?
But there's other DNA too that they found.
I will get to that. I'm asking specifically because both of you guys prefaced this. Remember, you guys threw out Brian Kohberger didn't have a connection is the same. So I'm going to toss it to you now, Lucky. Do you think that DNA holds any weight, or should we just discount it altogether and just say it's not there?
No, I don't think we can discount it. I mean, you can't discount the DNA, even though it's touch DNA, even though it's on a movable object. you can't discount it. It was there. I mean, you know, how it got there or how it was tested or whatever. We know that Brian Kohberger's touch DNA was on that button snap of that knife sheath. And, you know, the defense, I don't believe, has denied that that's his DNA either. So I feel like
I think they conceded it is.
I agree. And I think that it's one of those things where it was in the crime scene. Are there a lot of things that could have happened? You know, could that knife sheath have been brought into the house by someone else? Could it have already been inside the house? You know, there's a lot of different scenarios that could play out. But one of those scenarios is that his touch DNA was on the button snap of that knife sheath and it was inside the crime scene. Now, to me, I don't feel like it's concrete, only because I'm still kind of up in the air about how they did the IGG investigation. So to me, it's not as concrete as, say, a photo of him standing by the sliding glass door or a video of him driving his car around the 1122 King Road. Something like that, some sort of solid connection, a DM on social networks from him to one of the victims, something like that. That's what I'm really looking for.
Would you like to throw your 2 cents in? She just kind of looks at me like, really? You're going to put me on the spot like that? Hell yes, I'm going to put you on the spot like that. That's what we do on this show.
I mean, the thing that's hard about it all is, I mean, we've all continually talked about it. Was the DNA actually legitimately discovered? I mean, is touch DNA actually valid? What about the other DNAs that were found at the crime scene? And I 100% believe that there's more than one person involved in this crime. I don't think, if it is Brian Kohberger, I don't think he's the only one. And seeing him in court, I think Lucky and we kind of talked about this before, is my kind of feeling about him is he seems like a nice guy, but something seems off. Something does seem a little weird, and I don't know what it is. So it's hard because, I mean, I do honestly feel like he could be involved, but to what extent involved, I don't know. I don't think I 100% believe yet that he actually committed the crime, but I think like he must have been involved. I think he had some part in it. Was he the one that cleaned up afterwards? Was he the one that, you know, was the getaway driver? What kind of involvement did he have?
And Sean Marie absolutely said it right. I want to bring it to your attention, Jen, as we sat in the courtroom and you got the feeling of a little bit odd, a little bit different. You do realize that he is deemed on the spectrum of autism. And it is 100% the defense that's bringing out this young man is odd. This young man is different, and they need to get before the very jury and explain to why. And look, I'm going to be very honest. I saw that in the courtroom. Like, I saw it.
Right.
And I didn't take it as him being odd. I didn't take it as Brian Kohberger being different. I still saw the normal person within Brian Kohberger. And that's why I've said, and I continue to stand on my own 2 feet to say, because I saw the kid in person, I don't see a threat within Brian. Like, I don't see him as a threat. And I'm a little bitty guy, guys. Like, I'm not that tough guy that's going to go just duke him out with everybody and win every little fight and blah, 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 blah. You know, I'm not that tough guy that can pound on my chest and know I'm all He-Man. But Brian Kohberger would not be a threat. And then to hear the latest interview by Steve Gonzalez, where he clearly states his daughter's face had been hit and devastated to the point that bones were broken. Boy, it would take a lot for me to believe that Brian Kohberger would be the one that would do that. Like, whether he's got an issue with a female or not, nobody, Lucky, and I know you've done your research too, and I've done my research. I've dug deep to find one person that said Brian Kohberger had an offense of violence against anybody,
Right.
especially a female.
Well,
I've
and
never even,
I think
nobody.
that's a good point, and I think that's one of the things about this suspect, is and I'm going to be talking about this in a video coming up. There's 3 elements of this whole entire case, and none of them make sense. I mean, the suspect doesn't make sense to me. I mean, you have a 28-year-old at the time, who's a PhD student with no history of violence, no history of, no criminal history other than stealing his sister's cell phone, which I believe was expunged after he completed the court requirements. And then the second aspect is you have the actions of the witness as well as Bethany. I mean, those don't make sense either. And then the third aspect is the investigation, which makes even less sense than the other 2. So I think that that's why so many people are following this case, because there's so many aspects that just don't add up. And I think that with Brian Kohberger, that was one thing that Steve Gonsalves said in this interview, was that, Kaylee was punched in the face. And it made me think, was the same person who was holding the K-bar also using that same hand to punch Kaylee in the face? That's what I don't understand. Why would somebody risk dropping that K-bar? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, obviously they would have the K-bar in their dominant hand. So unless they were ambidextrous or something of that nature, it just seems strange that they would use the same hand that they're holding the K-bar with to punch the victim in the face.
Well, and think about it, to add this to that mix now, Bucky, with exactly what you're talking about. Then, of course, I kind of want to run back over, and talk to, back about the sheath and the movable object that was found with the DNA. But I do want to get directly in response to what you just brought up. So you have an individual that's supposedly coming in that is prepared for a long period of time. Many people that have pointed at Brian Kohberger as the perp of this crime have literally gone down a path to say he's been preparing for this for a long time, even buying the weapon almost a year in advance of the crime. So if that were the case, I don't think you entered the crime scene with the sheath on the weapon that you're supposedly going to utilize in this devastating crime. Like, that's just a wasted just thought process to me. But on top of that, now you got a defense expert that is coming to the plate, and he's going to testify to this at court. And it's very interesting. Multiple weapons. I'm setting aside for a minute multiple perps. I want to visualize just the defense and their argument of multi-weapons. And then if this is still to be projected as Brian Kohberger as the only perp of this crime, can you imagine Brian Kohberger walking into this crime scene with multiple weapons, possibly still in their sheaths? So were both weapons still in their sheath? Was one a knife and one was a different type of, what are we talking about here? Because I think if they say multiple weapons, I believe they're going to talk about 2 different types of knives, even maybe more. Was he smart enough to take one sheath off one knife, but not off another? I mean, what are your thoughts on this, with that sheath possibly coming in, but multiple weapons are involved? I mean, that just doesn't make sense.
I think that if it's multiple weapons, in my opinion, it's multiple suspects. I don't believe that he ran in there with 2 weapons, one in each hand. I mean, that would be awkward anyway. I mean, how is he going to open the back door? What if he trips walking up the steps? He's running through this house with a weapon in each hand. I mean, it seems as though you would want to have a free hand, not only to be able to open doors and be able to hold on to rails or be able to run up the stairs, but you also need to be able to manipulate your victim. And if you're holding a weapon in each hand, how are you manipulating your victim? And how did Kaylee get punched in the face if you've got a weapon in each hand?
Well, a lot of people would say she got hit in the face because they used the tail end of the K-bar or some of that. But I don't think people truly understand how difficult it is to navigate a sharp object, a weapon like a K-bar, be able to utilize your hands in not only throwing punches, but even trying to restrain somebody, hold them, and not cut yourself in a significant way. I'm sorry, that doesn't make sense to me. I've been in my few free for alls in life, and I'm sure you've had a fist fight or two in your days. Especially considering you and I are both from New Mexico, and I know we had to duke it out to survive. We definitely we were walking the hard path when we were in New Mexico as white boys like we are, but
Right.
I can't remember many fights I walked away from without some sort of mark, some sort of drop of blood, and those are even fist fights that didn't involve a weapon like a K-bar. A K-bar's, I think, more
Are
difficult.
we frozen?
Are we frozen, Lucky? Can you tell?
Yeah, you are frozen.
You can hear us okay though still?
Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfect.
Why don't you
Otherwise,
talk for
frozen.
1 sec? We're gonna pop down, pop right back up. Hold on.
Okay. So let's talk about this multiple weapon situation, because in my opinion, if there's multiple weapons, there's got to be multiple suspects. I just don't see one person walking in holding a weapon in each hand. That wouldn't even make sense. It wouldn't even feel natural for the person to walk into this house like that. So I think if they do have an expert that comes in and testifies that there were multiple weapons, then I'm going to have to guess that there were multiple suspects as well. Hi, Susan Russo. It's good to see you here. Hi, Sherry. Swamp Rose, it's always good to see you here. Paisley Park, I'm glad that you're here. I'm glad that you were able to catch this live.
All right, Lucky, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, we're working on the video on here. I think what happens here is it's going to want me to step out and step back in. The problem with that is I think it affects your live if I do that.
We'll just go with our screen.
So we're probably just going to go with the screensaver here, and you'll have to bear with us. I apologize.
Okay.
I'm trying to fix it, but you probably heard me screaming in the background there for a minute too, because I didn't have it on mute.
Hi, Paisley Park. It's good to see you here. Hi, Josie Weaver. It's so good to see you here.
There's you guys did have a couple questions that we wanted to answer too. Dark Angel asked, thank you so much for that super chat. Who would be the number one alternative suspect in your minds right now?
If there is an alternate suspect, I would have to say that it would have to have something to do with the fight that happened at the frat house. That would be my guess. I mean, without any type of, without any type of names to choose from, in my opinion, I think it would have to do something with the fight that happened previously at the frat house. It's odd to me that that Ethan and Xana are involved in an altercation at the frat house, and then just hours later, they lose their lives. I mean, that's the problem. There's a lot of coincidences that just don't add up. Thank you, Jeremy Pearson. I appreciate it.
I take a little bit different stance on that. So maybe I should go last on this, and I'll let Jen maybe project out. She just said, no, I go ahead. I think she's going to avoid the alternative suspect disclosure here. And the number one thing I'll say is this, is I personally won't name anybody's name around this case because I see everybody is innocent until proven guilty. And I don't have evidence against anybody that I could point a finger at and say, I think because of this, they're involved, because I don't know. I don't know the entirety of what happened at the frat house between individuals. I've heard of a little bit of an uproar, a little bit of a dispute. Do I know how far that dispute went? I really don't. I don't know if a punch was thrown or not thrown. And then I hear that, Xana Canoodle's father was so upset he wanted to come over and check on his daughter, which I think as a father is very important. If a father makes that statement, he was absolutely worried about something. But then I hear that at 2 a.m., Xana and Ethan were no longer at the house. They had gone back out. So how serious was it? I don't know. I don't know what's going on. But, the one thing that I have rolling through my head since I took a little step back and I started to really go through my inner feelings and thoughts about this, the number one thing I walked away with when it comes to alternative suspect and who I could possibly feel as though would be linked to that, the number one thing I would have to look at is a connection to Brian Kober. Because Brian Koberger's knife sheath, I shouldn't say his knife sheath. Let me say his touch DNA was found on a knife sheath within the home. I feel as though there's a connection to somebody that knew Brian Koberger at the least that could have potentially had some of his DNA on them to put on that sheath. And does that mean that Brian Koberger is the perpetrator of this crime in my mind? No, not 100%. Does that give me the idea that Brian Koberger knows something about this case? I think so. He did ask some pretty odd questions upon being arrested, which I don't know if they're real, not real. I mean, with this investigation, I'm sorry. Right. The number one thing I should say about this investigation is we're never going to have a good enough idea who could potentially be a suspect in this case because they did a piss poor backdoor job in investigating Brian Koberger that God knows what they did in other investigations to clear people. I don't know. I just don't know because I don't fully understand what they did to get to Brian Koberger. Because the IGG, if that's really what you utilize, you should stand proud that that worked so well because that seems like the future way of catching criminals. And you want to put it up on this trophy mantle that the IGG is the best way to solve crime. And all they did in this case was want to backdoor it and hide it.
Right. Well, and that's
keep
the
it
problem.
out of trial.
That's the problem. That's the problem with the whole investigation. I think the gag order and all of the secrecy surrounding this investigation has really hurt this because, in my opinion, it's damaged the credibility of the investigation. Because to me, if you're hiding everything, then there's a reason. It's not just to protect the integrity of the investigation. I understand that part. But once you've arrested your suspect and this suspect is sitting in a courtroom, why keep everything so secret? All of the information that we received after Hitler made that possible, it could have been released a year and a half ago. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. And I think that's why this investigation is so questionable. Because they've tried to do everything in the shadows and they've tried to, in my opinion, the prosecution was trying to cover for the feds when it came to the IGG investigation, because I think the feds did some shifty things during that investigation. So anytime you have the prosecution trying to cover for a law enforcement agency and an investigation, to me, that's a problem because everything is supposed to be transparent.
Yeah, I agree.
There's Jen's addition to this conversation. Yes, I agree with Lucky. The hell with my husband, A.R. Hayes. He doesn't know a damn thing about what he's talking about.
That's
but,
not true.
At the end of the day, I'll kind of preface it this way. And I have to agree with a couple of people I listened to. And I don't like the fact that I have to agree with this because this isn't something you want to agree with. When someone survives a tragedy like this, you want to hold them close. You want to cuddle them, and you want to help them get through the turmoil they're going to experience for the rest of their life. There's two problems with this scenario when it comes to the survivors in this case. One, Bethany, I don't know enough about the situation with Bethany, so I kind of set her aside. But when it comes to Dylan, none of it makes sense with Dylan.
No.
She's exactly in the middle of the crime scene, not telling the truth about something. I hate to say it. She's not telling the truth about something. And I know that for a fact because it doesn't take 4 interviews in an interrogation room over a crime like this to get to the point you saw someone wearing a mask. It doesn't take that long. Like, you're
Well, and I think,
Go ahead.
wasn't it suggested to her that she was seeing a balaclava? I think she was led a lot in this questioning, and that's the thing. If that's what's so off about this, is that if Brian Kohberger did commit these crimes or was part of these crimes, why would Dylan, who he has no connection to that we're aware of, why would Dylan seem as though she was covering for him? Because in my opinion, it looks like Dylan is covering for someone. And that, why would that be Brian Kohberger?
See, and I get that feeling very much so. And I've listened to a couple other people discuss the fact that Dylan needs to be more investigated and potentially looked at as an alternative perpetrator in this crime. But you see, I very much want to remove the word alternative suspect in this crime. I want to put in there co-defendant / co-conspirator of the crime, because she's literally in the middle of the crime scene the entire time. And I know people have, they put out the idea that she left, she went to the hotel, she did this, she did that. A defense expert is going to take the stand and talk about cleaning within this home. And I highly doubt that they're going to go down this road that this cleaning happened by a single perp. They're going to have to try to portray the cleaning happened after the crime happened, in between the crime and the 8-hour after the fact 911 phone call. So they're going to insinuate Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk had knowledge of what happened within that home prior to calling 911. And they potentially helped clean that crime scene, which means exactly what you said. They covered for somebody, if not were even more so involved, which is pre-knowledge of a crime, which is a federal crime. That's conspiracy to commit capital murder. That's federal. And remember, at the very beginning of this case, they were holding federal grand juries, and that's why the defense had to request all the federal subpoenas. They were investigating this as a conspiracy to commit capital murder. I guarantee you the investigation started as a multi-perp investigation, and that's why even when they were looking for the white Hyundai Elantra, they said the occupants of the car. They didn't say the occupant. They didn't say we're looking for the driver of the Hyundai Elantra that was in the neighborhood at 3:15 a.m. They said we're looking for the occupants of this car. They gave it up. They said we're looking for multiple people. And we know they investigated someone else very early on. They had another prime suspect. Is that person still a prime suspect and they're just trying to connect the dots? And that could potentially be who Ann Taylor said, we want to know who the co-defendant / informant is. Are they hinting at that other person you were investigating? Who is that? Who is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, didn't Steve Gonsalves say that, and I could be mistaken, but I believe that Jack Ducour was one of the persons of interest, right? In the very beginning. I mean, it seems like he would definitely be a person of interest from the beginning. I mean, he was talking to the girls an hour before, everything went down at the corner club. So
I know they discussed that, and that's now where Steve Gonzalez has become very defensive, saying, I even made him lift up his shirt sleeves to see if he had any cuts. And okay, dude, look, I know you've gravitated over. You love your daughter's boyfriend of many years. That's great. Most fathers hate their daughter's boyfriends. Even after they're married, they still don't like them, but it's okay, Steve. We get it. Everything shifted in his mind now. It can't be Jack D. It can't be anybody other than Brian Koberger, because this is who's under arrest, and this is who I want convicted of this crime. And I think, that's a double-edged sword. Steve Gonzalez just doesn't want this to become a long tenured investigation and possibly a cold case if Brian Koberger is possibly found innocent of this crime. That's exactly what this is going to become. So now he's on a tirade to ensure guilt. And I don't know if I disagree with him for wanting to do that. I just disagree from afar that I don't think it's the right thing to do. But as a father, I can't say I wouldn't be hell-bent on getting this kid convicted and potentially put to death.
Well, absolutely. And there's a question I just saw, and it's they were basically asking if, let me see if I can find this again. But basically what they were saying is that didn't the video from 1112 King Road, would that have been able to see Jack D's house? But I don't think that's the video that they're referring to. I think they're referring to the video from 1126, not 1112. So because they triangulated the camera footage in that neighborhood.
Right. 1112 doesn't go up at the angle where Jack D was. He was more back behind that area to the left, where they were walking the dogs up to search the pathway along that fence line. He's almost directly at that angle, just farther up. So the 1112 King Road camera, I don't believe would get to Jack D's. But from what I understand, I think they did say they had something that did hit that area. I don't know what camera that is.
It was the 1126 camera, I think, that would definitely have been able to see Jack D's house, because Jack D lived at 1127, right? So it would have been the next door house, or maybe no, it would have been the house right across the street from where Jack D lived. I think that would have had a perfect angle to be able to see whether, he was going in and out of that front door.
Yeah, I don't see Jack D as a part of this. I just don't. I don't know if he knew something, knows something. I just don't think that. Just in my gut, I don't feel him being involved. And that's the thing. Like I said, being able to step away from him, man, because we've been covering this for so long. We talk about it so much. We get so in depth with our community, with the subscribers, with other creators. We hear what people have to say, and then we start kind of reflecting on that. It becomes a part of our own conversation, that we never take a moment sometimes to step back and just try to take it all in and formulate our own thoughts and reel in the way, we're looking at things. And, a lot of people, I guess, would maybe look at me and say, oh, now all of a sudden you're switching teams. You're on the conspiracy team now. You've been paid off. You bought out, and that's not the case. It's just, I'm sitting back and I'm just trying to take in everything that's accumulating up. And I know we're heading towards trial. That's number one thing. We're going to trial. This isn't, a lot of people are thinking this new secret hearing is about Judge Hippler and him being against it. No, this is the jury questionnaire. They're doing this in confidence behind the scenes because both sides objected to each other's questionnaires. And at the April 9th hearing, while Jen and I were right there in the courtroom, Bill Thompson stood up and he clearly stated we need to get together, and the judge set it up and said we're going to do it remotely in closed court. And I guarantee you that's what this is. This is when they're making the decision on the jury questionnaires and where they're going with that.
Right.
So this isn't some secretive thing where all of a sudden this case is going to get thrown out, or
No.
that's not where we sit. We're at pre-trial now. The next big thing to happen is May 15th, when it's up to Ann Taylor to step before Judge Hippler if she has evidence. But that's the problem, Lucky. That's really where my problem is right now. And then, I just kind of want to discuss this real quick, and then Jen has starred questions. So we'll hop into the community and tackle some of those, both from your side and our side. But in your thoughts, in your opinion, right now, in looking at this, we have Bryan Kohberger right now, has been arrested, is awaiting trial. They're putting together all the discoverable evidence. They're putting together the entirety of the case go trial. What do you think Ann Taylor and her investigative team could have potentially found as evidence that's good enough to be able to discredit everything against Bryan Kohberger and literally get this judge to say, okay, we got to throw all this against Bryan out, and now we're going to pursue this other person or persons? What evidence do you think they're potentially going to bring to showcase that?
That's a good question. Before I mention that, I just want to say, because I'm glad that you touched on this, because about this new information that's coming out and stuff like that. And I've made a few videos where I have some doubts about Bryan Kohberger, and I've been very transparent about that. And a lot of people in the comments have said, did they get to you, and are you going to the other side? And it's not that. The important thing to remember is that information is coming out right now that we have not seen in the last 2.5 years, and all of that, not all of that information is going to be favorable to Bryan Kohberger. So to me, I want to look at all of that information. I want to look at everything. And I think it's very important to remember that with new information coming out, there's a possibility that there's going to be information that looks bad for Bryan Kohberger. So if we don't look at that information and we don't discuss that information, then we're just basically pushing a narrative at that point, because we have to look at everything. We talk about mainstream media, and we talk about Nancy Grace, and we talk about a lot of these channels, and we get frustrated with them because they only push one side. They're pushing a narrative that Bryan Kohberger is guilty. And it really upsets us, because we know that there's a lot more information out there. But if we're only looking at the information as that Bryan Kohberger is completely innocent, then we're no better than Nancy Grace. We're no better than the mainstream media. If we're just pushing that narrative. To me, I want to talk about true crime. True, like not push a narrative or anything like that. I want to talk about all of the information, whether it's beneficial to Bryan Kohberger or not. And I feel like that is true crime. And so, I know when I put a video out that is not favorable to Bryan Kohberger, I already know that I'm going to get some heat for it. But if I don't look at all of the information, then I'm not being true to myself, and I'm not being true to my viewers. If I'm just sitting there telling you what you want to hear, then I'm not being true to myself. I'm not being true to the viewers. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind, is that for me, I'm interested in looking at all of the information, whether it's favorable to Bryan Kohberger or not. And I think that's really important. And in order for me to be good with myself and be true to myself, I have to look at everything. And I want to share that with all of the viewers, because I'm having doubts and I'm having questions. Now, I'm not saying that Bryan Kohberger, that I've seen a connection. I'm not saying that he committed this crime, but I do want to look at all of the information, because I think that it's important. And like I said, if we don't do that, if we're just pushing one side of the narrative and not looking at all of the information, then we're no better than the mainstream media that's pushing their narrative.
Right. And like they say, there's two sides to every story. So you have to look at both sides, hear both sides of the story, look at every evidence that's presented to you, look at everything all together as a whole so that we could actually get to the truth.
Right.
You can't know the truth by just one side. If you're not looking at everything, you only have a small, tiny bit of the puzzle, there could be a huge portion to it that you're missing. You have to open your eyes to the whole picture. Look at both sides. Look at everything that's being presented, whether it's good, bad, ugly. We need to know the truth. And that's how you do it, is you have to look at everything.
I agree.
I think the biggest thing that people need to understand, and Lucky and I and Jen all stand together on this, is we do believe in innocent till proven guilty. We want to see the direct link, the direct evidence presented to us in an honest, transparent manner, as if we were on a jury. We want you to present it to us to where it lines up, the dots connect, and it makes sense. And even though I stand with you, Lucky, I 100% see some issues within this case that could directly lead to Bryan Kohberger. Do I believe that they're going to? I don't know at this point, because I don't know exactly how this is going to be portrayed by the prosecution in their manner of presenting it before a jury. I don't know what their experts are going to say or not say. I don't know what the blood splatter in this home looks like. I don't know a lot of this evidence that's going to be put out there. But at the end of the day, I do know where my 2 feet stand. And the one thing that I took a lot of heat, Lucky, for when I came to this platform is, oh, you're an ex-convict. You're a guy that, you know, went through the system. You got found guilty. You got to have hate. You got to have disagreements with the way the justice system works. You're going to deny and say everybody's innocent, that it's corruption. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I do want to help people understand kind of how the process works by giving you what I've experienced, what I've seen, what, you know, how they did certain things within the courtroom, why they did those things, what they meant when they did them. But at the end of the day, I am completely fine saying if somebody's guilty of the crime, they need to go do the time. Just like when I committed my crimes, I may have been the whole deceiver and put my hands up. I didn't do it until I literally got convicted. I was like, damn, they got me. All right, shoot. Now I got to go do my time, you know, and I always went and did my time. When I got busted, I went and I did my time. That was just what it was. I didn't try to hide from my actions. I'm more honest about them today than I ever was in the past. But at the end of the day, the one thing that I do want people to understand, when Lucky and I speak of something that may not look good for Bryan Kohberger, we're not pointing the finger at him saying he damn well did it and we know it. What we're saying is we see some things that don't look good, but we don't see the totality of the investigation done properly to lead to a final conviction of Bryan Kohberger at this very moment. We'll see what plays out. But I need people to understand on my channel, I'm never going to portray that the entire country is corrupt and involved in prosecuting Bryan Kohberger or finding this young man guilty. I don't think a conspiracy is at play here. I don't think that the knife sheath was flown in from Africa in a box by multiple, agencies to figure out who they were going to plant it on in the Moscow, Idaho area for quadruple homicide. Like I don't feel that. I don't see that. Bad investigation, yes. Backdoor tactics, yes. Overall conspiracy, not so much. You're on mute, Lucky.
Oh,
Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute. I thought I was interrupting you, but I wasn't. I was on mute. So, the thing is that it kind of baffles me, because if you look at all of the information as a whole, and not all of that information is favorable to Bryan Kohberger, then all of a sudden you're labeled a guilter. All of a sudden, it's always a side, and I'm not on a side. I'm not Team Kohberger. If Bryan Kohberger committed this crime, he deserves to be held accountable to the highest extent. But I think it's baffling to me that if you look at all of the information as a whole and you don't choose a side, then you're a guilter. You know, it's crazy to me that it makes no sense to me whatsoever. I mean, I feel like, aren't we here to find the truth? I mean, isn't that what we're here for? Or are we here to push the narrative that Bryan Kohberger is completely innocent? You know, either we're here to talk about true crime, or we're here to be Team Kohberger, and that's not intention. That's not what I want to do.
Well, and that's the thing. None of us are a part of Bryan Kohberger's defense team, so we can't put up the defense to help Bryan Kohberger be found not guilty of this crime. I don't have any tips that I could call in that's going to help this young man beat the charges against him. I don't have anything more than what's being presented to us in this case as evidence through the court documents, through the courts themselves, through the things that we're learning. Now, do I agree with things that are being said outside of the courthouse by all different sides that could potentially have an impact on this case? No, not really. I know there's false information being shared across the board, and that's not only from the guilty side of things. There's unfortunately on the innocent side of things, there's a lot of false information being shared from all different directions. And I think at the end of the day, what we need to do is fully understand this battle is going to take place in a courtroom.
Absolutely.
This battle is not going to come down to a judge making the decision on Bryan Kohberger's guilt. Will he play a part? Yes, he will, because he handles the objections. He handles the various things people are going to be able to say within that courtroom and what they're going to be able to do tactic-wise. At the end of the day, it is going to be those people within that jury box that are going to hear all the expert testimony. They're going to hear not only the prosecution's experts, but they're going to hear the defenses as well. They're going to hear every word said. If people legitimately want Bryan Kohberger to get the fair shake in this courtroom and have the best chance to prove himself as a person that did not commit this crime, they don't need to be writing letters of complaint to the court. They don't need to be complaining to the state of Idaho. They need to be writing letters of inspiration and of gratitude to Ann Taylor, Massop, and Nick Barlow, and giving them the full out confidence that they can step before this jury and utilize their strengths in the courtroom to argue for Bryan Kohberger. Because when it comes down to Bryan Kohberger's innocence or guilt in this case, Lucky, it comes to how well those three attorneys that represent Bryan Kohberger step up to the plate and prove themselves to the jury. Nobody else matters. It's that jury.
Right. Well, and I think it's important to understand that, you know, for me, I've probably made 150 Idaho 4 videos, and I would say 145 of those have been in favor of Bryan Kohberger. You know, but that's not because I'm on Team Kohberger. That's because that's the way I see it. It's because I do think that the investigation was janky. I do think that it's strange what happened with Dylan and Bethany and their actions. I think they're very strange. I think there's definitely something very odd about this suspect. You know, it does seem very strange that Bryan Kohberger is the suspect in this crime. So I haven't changed my stance at all. But I want to look at everything. You know, I want to look at all of the information.
Now, I want to answer a quick comment up here, and then Jen's going to get into the questions. In regards to somebody asking me if I'm in direct contact with Bryan Kohberger via video, I'm not. I went through the process of trying to be approved through visitation with Bryan Kohberger. In-person visitation at Ada County is not available for any inmate, which I knew when you get into maximum security, it's very difficult to get in-person visitation. Even when Jen came to see me for the short period she was able to visit me, it was behind glass. And then after that, they moved us to a computer. Bryan Kohberger can only get video visits, and I have not been able to do any of that. So to answer that question, no, at this point, I'm not in any contact with Brian Koberger whatsoever. I don't think Brian Koberger is going to have contact with anybody moving forward prior to trial outside of his mother or his father. They may even potentially be careful because there's so many rumors in regards to his sisters potentially writing books and maybe even being involved in other ways. Some of those people will be testifying at the upcoming trial as well. So there's so much protection right now in regards to Koberger, who he interacts with, who he talks with. They've even shut down his capabilities of getting, commissary money from certain people, and there's a lot going on behind the scenes when it comes to Brian Koberger. So everybody just kind of stay patient. We'll see him when he gets to trial, and then thereafter we'll see what happens when it comes to letter writing and visitation and things of that nature. So quickly just want to answer that. I'm sorry, Lucky, but Jen's going to get to some questions. I'm going to grab something to drink. She'll get some questions. If you want to hammer one out before I get back, that'd be great.
Sure.
All right, so here's one that was asked a while ago from Paul. What's the truth about murder crime scene pictures online shortly after the murders?
I don't know. I've never seen any crime scene photos from the Idaho 4 crimes. I don't know that we will ever see those photos. I'm not sure. That's I haven't heard of that. I didn't know that crime scene photos did come out shortly after the crimes occurred. So that's a good question.
I haven't seen any either, so I'm not aware of that.
There's been no crime scene photos. Come on.
Jacob wants to know, question AR, if Ann Taylor and her defense team does name alternative perp, will the announce a possible arrest, because it does not help if they are still out there, in my opinion.
Okay. Lucky, can I get into this subject for a minute? I would love your intertwining into this as well.
Absolutely.
So let's discuss what happens when you're actually in the midst of a trial or getting ready to go to trial for an arrested individual that's been charged with the crime and sat in jail now for approximately 3 years, with all evidence discoverable been turned over from the prosecution to the defense. And now we're actually in the stages where the defense is now turning over their evidence, because the defense team also has to do their own investigation. Everything that they find that could potentially be evidence in the case, either in benefit of Brian Koberger or against Brian Koberger, has to be turned over to the prosecution for them in return to be able to investigate that information and that evidence. So what Ann Taylor now, what she's up against is 2.5 years into this case, right prior to trial of Brian Koberger, she has now motioned to the court for a hearing to be able to speak upon alternative suspects where she was given a tip. Her investigative team dug into this tip, and they feel as though they may be able to present evidence of an alternative perp to the judge, because that's what he said would have to be done for them to discuss it at trial, utilizing certain scenarios or people that could take the heat off of Brian Koberger. Now, what you first of all have to understand, she's not doing this to get Brian Koberger released from jail. She's doing this as a defense for Brian Koberger at trial. So in the beginning, Lucky, we discussed the fact she could either try to prove innocence, that Brian Koberger did not commit the crime, but not naming a scenario or a person that could be an alternative situation. Or she could take the route that she potentially may. We don't know if she is. May 15th, she may step in front of Judge Hippler and say, I have nothing to present to you evidence-wise. I can't move forward. We're just going to go with the innocence. Brian Koberger didn't commit this crime defense at trial. We're not going to name anybody. We're not going to say any scenarios. We're just going to portray innocence. If she does step in front of Hippler, let me explain to you where her hurdle is. And then I'm going to toss this to you right here, Lucky, because I want your opinion on
Okay.
One, Ann Taylor, if she brings in the extra blood or DNA found at the crime scene, here's the hiccup that she has. Her investigators cannot get a court-ordered warrant to get somebody's DNA to compare to those DNA samples. She will not put a name to a DNA sample unless it's in CODIS. If it's found in CODIS, she can go the route of having those tested in CODIS, which evidently I think you and I both know, I think we've all heard, law enforcement did not test those in CODIS because Payne said he thought they could only do one at a time, which
Right.
I laughed about.
Right. That's odd.
But tell me how they're going to put name to blood DNA or blood sample if they don't have anything to compare it to.
Right.
I'll throw that to you, Lucky. I mean, how does Ann Taylor connect those dots if she wants to put a name to those DNA and say, my prime suspect in this case is that blood on that handrail, and I think it's so-and-so? How does she get so-and-so's name if she doesn't have a warrant to compare the DNAs to each other?
Right. I think anything Ann Taylor tries to investigate is going to be difficult. I think that the prosecution has kind of made it pretty difficult to go in and start any new investigations. I mean, you figure how are they going to handle that DNA? How are they going to do? There's a lot of things in this investigation. They're not really going to be able to conduct a proper investigation any longer. The house is gone. So they leveled that house and buried it underground. So I think that, and I've said before, in my opinion, it was either the University of Idaho or the prosecution who have kind of created a situation where there's really not going to be any future investigations, or it's going to be extremely difficult.
Yeah, I at the end of the day, it's Brian Koberger or bust when it comes to this case. And I'm trying to explain to people, because everybody's running with these ideas that this alternative perp is what's going to get Brian Koberger off of this case, that he's going to be released out of custody because there's an alternative perp, and they're going to be, you know how hard it's going to be able to prove that? Do you think every level of law enforcement missed the opportunity to investigate other people in the initial part of this case? Do you just think they were tied on to Brian Koberger right from the beginning? He must have been framed because they were on to him right away, and they didn't look at it. They were looking at other people. They had another prime suspect, and they did an investigation. It didn't pan out, evidently.
Right.
Yeah. I have to tell people, and this is going to piss some people off, they're not ever going to be able to investigate anybody in the frat house. Do you know how lawyered up that frat house is?
They're extremely protected.
And think about how lawyered up the University of Idaho is. And they're combined. They're combined together. They're going to protect each other.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's a business. You know, I think that with the University of Idaho, I think that's another big problem of this whole case, is that the University of Idaho was so involved in this investigation and so involved with everyone who was involved in this investigation, because of course this is not a good look for the University of Idaho. And I think that they began doing damage control immediately, because it's not a good look. You know, I'm not trying to send my student to the University of Idaho if I think that there's somebody running around there, you know, taking people's lives. It's not a good look for the University of Idaho. And I think that Scott Green understood that immediately and tried to stop the bleeding right away. But I think that the fact that the University of Idaho was so involved in this investigation, along with the gag order and all the secrecy and everything else that was going along with it, created some problems.
Yeah, I screamed to the rooftops that this investigation was the worst investigation I've ever seen conducted in the entirety of my history of being around crime. That includes the people I've been in the courthouses with, watching their stuff go through the pre-trials, my own cases. This one's shady as all shady.
Absolutely.
But that doesn't mean that this defense team is going to have success going after alternative perps without direct evidence to those perps. You got to have an eyewitness. You got to have something that comes to the table that sways the very, I don't even know how to do it at this point, because I hate to say this too, Lucky. This judge already seems to think that Brian's guilty. And I've spoken about that. I disagree with his manner across the board in the way he's conducted this case, even calling one of the defense experts a conspiracy theorist out in open court. I just think that's ridiculous. I don't care whether this kid's guilty or not guilty. What's happening within the courtroom is not normal. It's not appropriate. It's not professional. Maybe that's the way Idaho does it. I don't know. I don't agree with that at all.
I agree. I agree with you. You know, it's a very strange. It's strange. You know, you have the judge. I mean, I even feel like Judge Hippler has kind of jumped in and argued for the prosecution a few times.
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, without a doubt. At the last hearing, and it's even shown in his motions that, you know, when he responded to the various motions that were put together, especially in the motions of limine, he made the argument that the prosecution did not make. He made it for them to make it seem like the reason why he ruled against the defense was because of a proper prosecutorial motion to the court, and that wasn't anything the prosecutors actually argued in their motions, yet he granted the prosecution based upon law, which, if that was the argument by the prosecution, I would have agreed with that. Like, I would have agreed. I would have said that was a good motion. That was a good argument. That made sense. But when it's the judge that has to do it for you, that's a problem, man. That's a problem.
Well, I think that, you know, Judge Hippler, he's very salty. You can tell he does not want to be there. He said those were his first words when he sat down, and he said, you know, let's not start this out with a lie and say that I want to be here. And I get it. Nobody wants to be in that courtroom. Nobody wanted this to happen. Nobody wants to be in that courtroom. But you're a judge. That's what you do. You're supposed to be impartial, you know, and I feel like I agree with you 100%. I think that his actions are very strange. I mean, he's obviously very biased, in my opinion, toward, you know, against the defense. And I think that it's always interesting to watch Massoth go back and forth with Judge Hippler, because I feel like she's on top of it. I don't feel like she is intimidated by him, but I do think that some of the attorneys are intimidated by him.
You know, Judge Hippler actually reminds me, I'm going to tell a little bit of a story of my past. When I was young and I got arrested, I had a judge that, when I look at Hippler, kind of actually reminds me of something that I went through and why I think this is such an uphill battle for the defense. I was 16 years old and I got arrested. I had gone into Albertsons and I had shoplifted some alcohol and some baseball cards. Like, I have no idea why a 16-year-old would go steal alcohol and baseball cards, but that was my mission for the day. And I got away, but they had contacted the police as I was getting out, and I saw the police coming, and I ran, and I hopped into a car, and the driver of the car was intoxicated. We ended up wrecking. That's how we got caught, is we ended up wrecking. And the kid hit another driver, and he was, like I said, he was intoxicated. So we both went to jail. He went on DUI. I went on theft. I went in front of my judge, and I remember his name real well out in New Mexico. It was Judge Beal. And I stepped in front of him, and they read the PCA and everything to him. And he said, no bail on me. And I said, wait a minute, no bail? I'm 16 years old. I don't even get bail. I get to go home to mom and dad. What are you talking about, bail? He's like, no, you're staying in. Come to find out, Judge Beal's son had just been killed 3 months prior to that by a drunk driver. So here I am sitting in the courtroom, and when they read the PCA, they stated clearly, we left the scene and were in a car accident because the driver of the car was intoxicated. So the judge thought that was me. He thought I was the drunk driver. And literally, he held me in jail while we go through this mine was literally misdemeanor charges. And he wouldn't let me go home because of the alcohol deal. And finally, the lawyers figured everything out. He got removed from the case. But that's how much he did not want me out, because he had this secondary deal that his son, the most painful thing that happened in his life, just happened to be a similar situation to what happened in my little baseball card and alcohol theft. But I see that kind of with Judge Hippler. It's like, what is going on in Hippler's mind that he's not opening just fully up to hearing out what the defense is saying here? Like, he's interrupting. He's very, even a little bit dicey. He's like, why would his DNA be at the crime scene? Well, why would you as a judge even be inferring that you're finding him guilty as if his DNA was you're not even taking into consideration it's touch or it's a movable object or any other scenario. You're just saying, well, why is his DNA at the crime scene? To me, that's saying, why is he so guilty? Why is he so guilty? That's what I'm hearing every time Hippler talks. Why is Brian so guilty? Why is he? And that's not what he's saying, but that's what I'm gathering. And
that's how it sounds.
Right. I didn't mean to rabble on. I just wanted to kind of share with you, a little bit of an idea of something I went through where I felt like I had a very biased judge that was affected by something that really covered his vision of what was happening in the courtroom. He literally thought I was a drunk driver. And I think as he sat on the bench, my judge felt like I was the person that hit his son. That's all he could see. He couldn't see my case. He could only see me as the drunk driver that hit his son. Right. That's hard to overcome.
Well, and I don't feel like there's any place for that. And that's why we have a judge sitting in the front and going, listening to all of the information. If you have the judge being biased towards one side, that's a problem, because that's going to be a difficult hurdle to overcome.
Yeah, Jen was in there too. How do you feel about Judge Hippler while we were there?
Well, I've already stated that a couple times.
I guess we won't get it another time, huh, Lucky? That's a kick in my knee.
I said before that I felt like he was definitely one-sided. I mean, I was surprised because the judge is supposed to be the most unbiased person in the room, and he seemed like he was very much on the prosecutor's side, rather than just hearing both sides out.
I always envision, Lucky, a judge being a referee. You're supposed to weigh it right down the middle. You're not rooting for either side. You're not rooting for either team. You're just making the calls that are going to keep everything fairly on the field with no personal fouls happening. You're going to keep it within the law. So motions are going to be ruled upon based upon the law and what's, are they well-written motions? Are they hitting on the right points? Are you missing the point? He can help guide this case, get it into trial, get it before a jury, and allow it to play out fairly for that jury to make the determination based on facts, whether somebody's guilty or not guilty. Right. But if you're not willing to work your way through the case as a judge, again, I'm going to say this again, and I know I've said it many times. I've never seen a case before where in the motions for suppression, the defense didn't get something suppressed. Something. Right. They lost every submission motion completely. And even when it was quite clear a Frank's hearing was on its way and coming, quite clear it needed to be had for fairness value. You have to hear it out. You got to make a decision based on the facts. It was clear as day a Frank's hearing had to happen.
Right. Well, I think it was 13 that were denied.
He denied all
13.
And the Frank's hearing.
Right. Well, and you know, this is my thing is that, you know, I feel like for me, it's kind of, I just want to see the evidence. I just want to see, you know, I want to hear all the information and see the evidence without any input from the judge. That's what I want to see. I think it was very obvious from the beginning that he was definitely leaning toward the side of the prosecution, you know, but for me, this is the thing is that they say that Bryan Kohberger is odd. Well, he may be odd, but that doesn't mean he's capable of this crime. You know, he may own a K-bar. That doesn't mean he's capable of this crime. I mean, I own a K-bar. Does that mean that I'm going to go out and commit this type of crime? Of course not. So I think that it's important to see all of the evidence, hear all of the information. And I think it's only fair that the defense gets to present everything that they want to present, or at least a lot of what they want to present. I mean, this is a capital case. So to me, it's very important.
I absolutely agree with you. But I mean, to add to that, a judge's determination of evidence needs to be clear-minded and look at how it was collected, how it was handled. Was it correctly done? What did law enforcement follow the procedures and the protocols to be able to conduct a proper investigation that led them to Bryan Kohberger? Right. And a judge needs to be able to open his eyes and be open-minded and say, okay, look, I'm looking at all of this and I see issues. I have to remove these pieces of evidence because this was not properly done. I have to remove it. If you can't show me proof of how you collected the DNA, tested the DNA, and the results of those tests, including the backup tests that you did that showcase how you processed what they call the error test, they have to go back in with that DNA again and reconduct it to see the errors so that they can weigh against, you know, how many of these are factual, how many come back with errors. They've showcased none of that. I'm telling you, from the beginning, I thought this DNA was at risk. I thought this DNA was going to be tossed, the knife sheath, especially when the prosecution says, well, we don't need it anyway. We're getting rid of the IgG. We don't need none of this stuff. Right. And never in the back of my mind did I say, well, the reason why they're saying that is because they had the buccal swab from a faulty PCA that led them to the connection of the two DNAs. I get that now. Now they don't need nothing else. And the judge is willing to say, yeah, you know what? That's cool. We'll just go with a tip. Just go tip.
Yeah. We need to see the work. To me, a screenshot, a screenshot is just not going to be sufficient, in my opinion. I feel like we need to see the work. We need to see the work that they did. And obviously, as they were doing this, they would have known that they needed this for trial. So it seems strange that they deleted everything. And then that makes it even more difficult for Ann Taylor to go back and check their work. So,
well, what baffles me, Lucky, is at the end of the day, if everything had ended up 100% proving Bryan Kohberger, that was absolutely without a doubt his DNA. That was absolutely without a doubt his sheet. That was Why wouldn't they just bring all that work? Why would they trash
Right.
it? Why wouldn't they keep all that? See, I understand the difference between the federal investigation compared to the state, and I think a lot of people need to fully understand the feds get away with a lot in their investigation compared to the state. The
Right.
feds have a lot of leeway. They have a lot of secrecy. A lot of stuff is done in the dark. When they go to court, the trial, they do not have to present the step-by-step stuff that the state does. But the problem is this case right now is sitting in a state court. This is
Right.
the state of Idaho against Brian Coburger. This is not the federal FBI against Brian Coburger. This is the state. And at the end of the day, I think the feds are just kind of laughing. They put up their two middle fingers saying, look, it's not a part of our problem. We're not
Right.
going to give you nothing that we did. We don't have to. But the problem is at the end of the day, this judge should say, okay, well, state of Idaho, Mr. Bill Thompson, Jeffrey Nye, it's good to see you in my courtroom. But if you didn't bring in the evidence, if you didn't bring in the work, I have to toss it. I got to throw it out. This is the state of Idaho. This is what we expect, and you ain't got it.
Well, I feel like, thank you, Jeremy Pearson, for gifting that membership. I really appreciate that. The thing is I feel like the feds conducted this entire investigation. I don't think that Brett Payne really knows what happened. I mean, he's sitting on the stand saying, I don't remember, I don't know, I don't recall.
He's pleading the fifth.
But yeah, I'm like, were you there? Did you see it? You're the lead investigator. Were you there? I mean, did you see, he talked about all of the meetings that they had, sometimes twice a day, where they all met up and they all got on the same page and talked about this investigation. But when he got on the stand, it didn't appear that way. It doesn't appear really that Moscow Police Department did a lot of this investigation or was involved in a lot of this investigation.
I got the reason why. I know why Brett Payne can't answer those questions. It's hard to hear things when you're so short, you're under the table all the time and you're trying to listen through wood. I mean, if he could have got on the high chair to get up to the table, he could have been a part of the conversation. Instead, he was down wiping everybody's boots under the table. Sorry.
I just don't get it. I don't get how the lead investigator doesn't know anything about the investigation. I mean, he didn't even know, like we've talked about before, he didn't even have Brian Koberger's name until December 19th, after the feds had been investigating him, in my opinion, since November the 29th.
Yeah.
Well, I almost wonder if he knows more than what he's saying, because in some instances, I feel like a lot of times law enforcement, when they are doing interviews or different things like that, they don't want to say everything yet. So they try to kind of keep it very, very vague. But I mean, when you're in the courtroom, you're supposed to say what you know. So it's kind of odd that they're asking him these questions and he's like, I don't know. Like he's just waiting to the end to like say everything that he knows. I don't know. It's just kind of weird. Like, does he actually know more than what he's saying? And he's just playing dumb? Or is he really have no idea?
Well, now,
or does he really have no
Well,
idea?
how long had he been he's only been an officer or a detective for what, 2 years? I think is who they put in charge of a quadruple homicide. A detective, Brett Payne's only been a detective for, I believe it was 2 years.
Well, you have to understand, one, this is my opinion, but, and Jeremy, thank you very, very much for the gifted membership to a Convicts Thoughts as well. We definitely appreciate you. But one, now he can't change his testimony ever on the stand because that's called perjury. So he's locked himself into those answers at this point. But two, Brett Payne was put into that position for a simple factor. And anybody that's put into a lead detective of a crime that's this size, this magnitude, probably this is going to go down as the biggest crime Idaho's ever dealt with.
I would agree.
At the end of the day, this is going to be the number one most seen, and this is going to approach one of the most popular cases, most likely ever in the United States. When this is said and done. And like I said, this is going to be talked about for the next 20, 30 years. Whether he's guilty or not guilty, this is going to still be in the talking paths of people for 20 years, 30 years. So for all of you guys that think I'm going to stop grifting anytime in the next, no, I'm kidding. But I think he was just somebody they could put into that position that they could just walk all over. He didn't know the procedures to be able to write to get the various warrants. So the FBI could direct him to do things the way they wanted it done on the state level, knowing that they would never themselves have the issue of the repercussions of what happens. This is going to fall down on Payne, and that's just that's craziness. And James Moen, I definitely appreciate you being here. He was over on your side for a minute, Lucky. He's a great person within the community. He's one of my mods, and I truly appreciate him. So if you ever see him on your channel, checking in with you during your lives, he's great individual.
I see him all the time. I appreciate him a lot. I see him all the time, and I really do appreciate him.
I mean, just for everybody that's in the crowd tonight, I can't speak for Lucky and Jen, but I can speak for myself, and definitely appreciative of all of you and the support and the love, and even the people that disagree with the things I have to say. I'm always appreciative of your opinion and the way that you project your thoughts with me, and and I'm glad that you're here with us tonight.
Lots of amazing people in the chat that I've seen. I'm very happy that you're all here watching.
Absolutely. This is always such a great community. It's always a great chat. It's always, for the most part, it's always very respectful, and it's always interesting, and it's always a good experience. It's never a problem. I really appreciate everybody that's in here, and a lot of these names, a lot of you I see often, and I appreciate you guys so much for supporting our lives and our channels as well.
Most definitely. How about Lucky? Why don't we do this, since our community's been so awesome? Jen's been starring some questions as we've been going through the chat here. I know some of these are a little bit older on the timetable, but why don't we hit some of these questions, get some of these good subscribers' questions answered for them, and see what we can do.
Jacob wants to know, could he also have broken his hand? I mean, Kaylee was against the wall. How many times did he hit it if he was fighting her, if he missed? You guys think that there's a chance that the perpetrator could have broken his hand during this?
Lucky, can I add to this question? And I want you to maybe leave that question up.
Okay.
Of course.
1 sec. No, she got rid of that question. But remember, it's a broken hand in regards to the punch that was potentially delivered to Kaylee's face. But I want to add just a little bit of a step to that. I know you've been covering this case for a long time, and I'm pretty sure you've heard the same things I have in regards to the facial injuries and the different beliefs that people have when it comes to those injuries. Do you recall those coming out in the evidence or through the court docs, or was this potentially leaked information, and now Steve Gonzalez is showcasing his hand that he's potentially the one that leaked this, and it's just maybe not even confirmed?
As far as the evidence of Kaylee?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess with Steve Gonzalez talking about how the injuries, how the means of death did not match between her and Maddie. I mean, I think that was a question that a lot of us had in the very beginning, because when he said that, it's been a while since he said that. And I think it caught a lot of our attention, because obviously it made me think, well, if their means of death didn't match, then that to me sounds like multiple weapons and multiple perpetrators. But I don't know that that's been confirmed. I
mean, in my opinion, look, I'm not going to speak negatively upon Steve Gonzalez. He's a father. He has a right to have his feelings, his opinions. He hired his own investigator. And Mikey S. just gifted an Unfiltered Lucky membership. Thank you, Mikey S.
Thank you, Mikey S.
One of my favorite individuals on the platform as well. I'm so appreciative of him behind the scenes with all the love and the support that he shares with me and the help that he gives me as well. At the end of the day, I don't 100% believe everything that's said. And I believe that there's some twisting that goes into this. My daughter was hit. Look, I'm one of the firm believers that Kaylee was asleep in her room. Maddie was asleep in Maddie's room. Kaylee heard the perpetrator upstairs, or perpetrators, whichever it might be, came out of her room and potentially got into a dispute, a fight with the perpetrator, maybe trying to save Maddie's life. Kaylee could have potentially been trying to save Maddie's life. And at that point, a fight's going to ensue. And I have a gut feeling that the perpetrator did more damage to Kaylee because the fight was on and if punches were thrown.
I agree. I agree.
I don't think the punches is what took her life. I believe that her life was taken with a weapon.
Well, and I think that Steve Gonsalves kind of confirmed that in the beginning when he said, he said that although their means of death didn't match, both of their lives were taken with a knife. So, no. I mean, it was kind of, and I agree with you. I talked about the Steve Gonsalves interview yesterday in my video, and I agree with you 100%. I tried to make that very clear that, we don't know that was all factual information. We don't know that what Steve Gonsalves is telling us is absolutely the truth. We don't know that. So, it's interesting because I do feel as though he was very close, that he's been very close to this investigation from the very beginning. But we absolutely do not know that everything that he says is true. I think that, in my opinion, we have to take the word of everyone in this investigation with a grain of salt, whether it be Steve Gonsalves or whoever. Thank you, Gene Romaine. I appreciate that.
Yeah, awesome. Another gifted Unfiltered Lucky membership. Definitely appreciate it, guys. You guys are making it excellent decision joining the team of Unfiltered Lucky. He does some amazing members' lives. And
thank you, Larisha Harris. I really appreciate that.
That's amazing as well. Definitely appreciate the super chat. So for anybody and everybody that is interested in joining an amazing community, a great creator that does just unreal, and you're bringing this new to the table, members only lives, Lucky, and I know you're always so enthusiastic. Like every night before you're going live with your members, I get this phone call from Lucky, and you and I end up talking like 3.5, 4 hours just out of the excitement that you're ready to rev and roll with that. So it's always amazing to see. So
it's awesome. I mean, to me, I feel like I get excited I really enjoy the lives a lot. I mean, I enjoy making my videos, of course, but I really enjoy the lives because I enjoy the interaction. And I love to hear other points of view. I love to hear, what other people have to say. And I'll be the first one to say that there have been a few things that have been said in the comment section that have changed my mind about things. So I do get into the comment section. I love, listening to reading the information and reading what's being shared, because there's a lot of very, very smart people in this comment section. And so a lot of the time sometimes when I'm in the comment section, I'll get information from people or even their ideas and insight. And it makes me think, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes it's changed my mind. So actually interacting with everyone is something that I really do appreciate. And when I tell people I truly appreciate you, I mean it. I do truly appreciate you. And I love to hear all of your ideas and all of your comments.
Well, I knew you and I were going to get along well when I commented on one of the first times I commented on one of your videos. So you told me to go F myself. And I just thought it was no. I knew we were friends for life at that point.
Thank you, Jan, for that $10 super sticker. I want to get into some of these other questions too, because we've had a lot of questions here. Let me see. So this one has 3 questions.
No.
Nope, that's not it. Never mind. Sorry. Where'd it go? Yeah, that's the wrong question. There we
Jen
go.
just put up a real nice nut.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put that on there. Sorry. This one, AR, you remember that Maddie's room, there was a huge piece of drywall cut. Could he or the perps injure their heads and their body fluids inside the wall or on it? What are your opinions?
Well, I definitely heard that was either blood splatter was on that part of the wall, or there could have potentially even have been something written. I don't know what you had heard about that, Lucky. I reached out to somebody that was keeping really up to date with the initial part of this investigation, even when the cleaning crews and the different people were coming in and out, and they knew people in the area. And some of the rumor was that was writing on a wall just above where Maddie's desk was. But I'm sure that could potentially also be blood splatter for maybe even when Kaylee tried to come into the room to save Maddie or what was going on. And maybe that's from the initial attack.
It was odd because if you look where that square was cut out, I wish I had this picture with me. If you look at where that square was cut out, it was basically directly behind where Maddie's desk would have been. And it's opposite of the bed. Now, those rooms are very small, but I've always felt like maybe it's possible that is where Kaylee was attacked. And I agree with you. I do think that it's very possible that something could have been written on the wall. You know who else did that was, in the Manson, murders that happened as well.
I think so if you get into the crimes where some of these very notorious, I guess, long-term serial killers, they always had prizes that they seemed to do, whether they staged bodies, whether they wrote on walls, whether I saw a crime scene when I was younger of an individual that took a life at my family's apartment complex that we owned in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And literally there was just writing all over the wall of these sick-minded people that wanted to leave messages. It was always very, very interesting. I think, to me in this situation, depending on who committed this crime, I feel like it's blood splatter. I really do. I think that's where probably a lot of blood splatter that would showcase how Kaylee was attacked while coming into the room rather than in the bed. Because I don't think that blood splatter gets on the wall where Maddie would have been laying in bed compared to where that wall is. That's just not a trajectory I would see. But a physical back and forth altercation during an attack, I could see that happening.
Right. That was real interesting that it was such a big piece of the wall, and like I said, the rooms are very small. But
I understand that they removed a lot of that second floor out too, really? Not just the floor, but I mean, I'm talking about the second floor walls, drywall, baseboards. I heard some of the kitchen cabinets were taken. So it seems like this is a pretty substantial crime scene. And I do remember Mavitt saying this was an extremely bloody crime scene. And based upon that, with now what we're seeing from the Dylan Mortensen angle, this is why so many people have so many more questions when it comes to Dylan Mortensen, because you also legitimately saw Xana's body before descending to the first floor to go into Bethany's room. Now we know you've actually seen Xana laying on the floor in her bedroom, and there's no speaking of any blood. You're not going to see into Xana's bedroom if all the lights are out.
Right.
Do people not realize that? If Dylan's leaving her room to go down those stairs, if all the lights are out, including Xana's bedroom light, you don't see her on the floor.
And she saw her well enough to describe her position.
That's right.
But
answer this to me. If you're under a blanket, laying on your bedroom floor, you're under the blanket, how do I know your head's towards the wall and your feet are towards me? Or how do I know your body position if you're under a blanket?
Right. Yeah,
So
exactly. Well, and I guess if you could see the top of her, well, I guess if you could see the top of her head, or if you could see her feet, but why do you just leave your roommate laying on the ground? I mean, how do you know that she hasn't had alcohol poisoning? How do you know
well,
that? So, I mean, you haven't been able to reach her. You've been trying to call everybody in this house. You've heard some noises that obviously scared you, that what did they say, freaked her out.
right.
And then you walk past the hallway and you see her laying on the ground in her bedroom. And it doesn't dawn on you to just walk in there maybe and just check on her, make sure that she hasn't, choked on vomit, or that hasn't had alcohol poisoning, or that there's not some type of emergency. I mean, and then just go down to Bethany's room and kick it for another 8 hours.
Well, how does she not see any blood?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're dealing with a crime scene that's this gruesome, I mean, that everybody's saying that it's like the worst they've ever seen, you
Right.
don't think that she's just passed out. You see some red stuff in places all over the place. I mean, it's
Right.
going to be on walls, even just on the floor, around her, on who knows? I mean, how do you not see anything and then just say, oh, I think she's passed out. Like you said, like, why don't you check on her, see what's going on? Like, this kind of weird.
And my biggest thing was that if this was one attacker, then this person has already been upstairs. He's already been upstairs, taken Maddie's life, fought Kaylee, taken her life, gone back down the stairs, walked across the house to Xana's room, taken her and Ethan's life, and then walked back out. How does he do this without leaving any trace of body fluid or anything in that common area that Dylan ran straight through?
Yeah.
I mean, she ran. I mean, even if she didn't see the body fluid around Xana, how did she not see? There's no way that this attacker is walking around this house and not leaving any trace of body fluid.
Right.
Well, that's why I did the video I did, where I said, if Dylan Mortensen came out of her room and was seeing Brian Koberger leaving the home, there would be blood tracked all through that walkway, down the stairs, into Xana's room, into the kitchen. There's no way she didn't walk through that. I don't care if you have shoes on or socks or bare feet. You track that blood to wherever you walk to. And I'm going to be very interested to see when we get to trial whether they could showcase her footprints of blood heading down to Bethany's room. I mean, I personally still have a problem too, because it sure sounds like somebody was heard in Xana's bathroom crying and in pain and not doing well and just ignored, and then laying flat out on the floor. I don't believe she was laying under a blanket on the floor. I just don't believe that. I believe she was laying on the floor. I believe Xana fought for her life, just like what people said, to the point that her fingers were almost severed off. That just doesn't come out of nowhere. People, had heard about what transpired in the bloodbath that happened. And I even think Mabbitt said this was a battle that happened in this house and there was blood everywhere. To the point that even officers were having to go through counseling. They were having to go through all kinds of things after this. So I just have a problem. We're going to see. We're going to see what happens when Dylan takes the stand, and I hope it makes sense. I hope by what she says it makes sense, because for all this time we've been scratching our heads, calling foul to be attacked by so many people, saying, "Don't attack the victim, don't attack the victim."
Right.
Well, look, my problem is this: Dylan Mortensen's alive right now, which is a good thing. That's a good thing. I'm not saying that's a bad part of this. Xana and Ethan on the very same floor as Dylan are not alive right now. And is it potentially a thought in my mind that if she had called 911 sooner, one of them could have been helped? because we hear of the crying, we hear of the moaning, we hear of the I'm here to help you, we hear
Right.
of all of this. Why was a phone call not made while all of that was happening? And you could have potentially caught the perp just outside of the crime scene. And on top of that, you could have potentially got to Xana with life-saving measures that could have potentially saved her life.
Well, and I think that's why we all have such an issue with, the two surviving roommates, is that nothing was done sooner. And we have proof in this last hearing that they were texting back and forth on their phones. They were doing different things on their phones the entire 8 hours. So they weren't sleeping. We know that that's not true. They weren't sleeping. So were they just too scared and they just wanted to hide and just waited it out? Or did they just not think? I mean, why wouldn't you try to call? You have your phone. Why wouldn't you call for help right then? Even if you're afraid, call 911 and say, hey, there's somebody here. Something's happened. We need somebody here right away. Like, and that's why I say, like, isn't there like laws that if you don't report a crime, or if you're there, you see something happening, you have somewhat of an involvement as well, just by being a bystander that didn't report it. This is crazy.
So this showcases that Jen is not the one putting out true crime videos on a daily basis getting attacked, because we've all thrown this around so much about how that's actually a crime to not report this. And how many people have you intertwined with, Lucky, that have come to the rescue? They were asleep. They were frozen shock face. They're young. They don't know. Ladies and gentlemen, she looked at Xana laying on the floor dead.
Right.
Or potentially dying. We don't know if she was dying or if she was dead.
Well, and
she looked right after watching the perp walk out of the house. And here's your alternative perp suspect. Ready?
Right.
If I was Ann Taylor, you know what I would attack? Whose contact were you putting on your phone 2 minutes supposedly before the cops believe this crime began?
Yeah.
You were putting a contact into your cell phone that was supposedly dying. What were you doing at 3:58 in the morning that got you a new contact to put into your phone? Who were you talking to?
Right.
Was it on the phone? Was it on social media? How did you get this person's number to make a new contact?
Yeah.
Well, and how clueless, really. I mean, if you really think about it, with Dylan, I mean, she had every indication that something extremely bad was happening in that house. I mean, there's no way that she's not hearing what's happening on the third level. And I don't care how much she had to drink. I mean, there's no way that she doesn't hear what's happening right above her, and then what's happening right on the same level that she's on. She basically, she heard the furniture, she heard the dog barking, she heard someone crying in Xana's bathroom, she heard somebody say that they were going to help her with and it was a strange voice. She sees a strange man in their house that she's 3 feet away from. Then she walks by and sees Xana laying on her bedroom floor. I mean, how many indications do you need that something really bad has happened? I mean, just short of the perpetrator popping his head in the door and saying, hey, Dylan, I just, committed a major crime here. Like, what would not, why would she ignore so many indications that something heinous had happened in that house?
Well, I also want to know why did law enforcement throw Dylan so harshly underneath the bus, but Bethany nothing? Because there is no way Dylan heard everything she did and Bethany knew nothing.
I agree.
It's not possible.
They both obviously knew something. And I'm very thankful that they're alive. Like, I'm happy that they were able to survive this. But I also want to know, what do they know? They're obviously not telling the whole of everything. I mean, hopefully we'll hear what they know. But it's just crazy that all of this happened in the home. and they did nothing. They just sat there.
Right.
And
to
you know,
me, that screams cover up. To me, that screams that they're covering for someone. That's why the whole idea that Brian Koberger committed this crime and Dylan and Bethany just happened to, you know, not call 911 until noon. It just doesn't make sense.
Well, and in your first initial thought too, like when you hear that, like that somebody was there and didn't say anything, your mind wonders, like, did they have a part to play in it, or like they just let it happen? You know, it's just very odd that somebody could hear those things, or, you know, see what they saw or whatever. I mean, you know, that they heard, you know, screaming and different things, and to not do anything makes you wonder, like, what part did they play? Did they play a part, or were they just too scared to do anything because, you know, they didn't want to get hurt either?
Right. Well, if you think about it, indirectly, they did play a part, because they didn't call for help. I mean, it makes no sense. You know, I've always said that I don't believe that Dylan and Bethany ever felt like they were in danger. I don't. I feel like if I'm Dylan and I've made it down to Bethany's room, I'm not going to stop there. I'm out that front door. There's no way that I'm just going to go sit in Bethany's room like a sitting duck and wait for my turn. I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Right. You're trying to get out of there. You're trying to call for help. You're trying to do something. I mean, it's that fight or flight, right? I mean, you gotta survive.
Right. You know? Right. I'm not going to go sit with Bethany so he can get a twofer on us. Like, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to go sit in Bethany's bedroom and get on social networks. I'm not going to get it. It just doesn't make sense that they basically just sat in Bethany's room and just sat there and waited. I mean, that's odd. And that's the whole odd part for me about this whole crime, is that to me, it looks like they didn't want to get law enforcement involved until they absolutely felt like they had to.
Right.
Well, that's one thing too. Pitbull Mama, and I just want to utilize this statement real quick that she left. That, you know, she was kind of joking around about Jen would be calling out to her pitties for help during this crime happening.
Yeah.
And people are forgetting this isn't just about Dylan and what Dylan heard and what Bethany heard. Murphy was upstairs barking. Yeah. Somebody had to get pissed off about the barking. Look, I know when my dogs are barking, and you'll hear me from across the house yell, "Be quiet," like different wording, but I'm not going to let my dog just continuously bark. And evidently that doesn't warn Dylan and Bethany that, okay, you just saw a perp in the house in all black carrying a vacuum cleaner dressed like a fireman walking out of your house, as if that wouldn't be odd. But you potentially see Xana laying on the floor. You've even said in a text message you're scared, and the dog barking doesn't alert you that maybe you should call 911.
Right. And there's you and Jen know as well as I do. You know, we're dog people. So we know the difference in a bark. I know when my dog is just barking to bark, and I know when my dog is barking because he's alerting. And it's a different bark. You know, it's not the same bark. And in my opinion, I have no doubt that Dylan knew that something was going on in that house. And that's what doesn't make sense about all this, because why wouldn't you why wouldn't you react in a way that I think most of us would react and call for help, flee the house? You know, I mean, I feel like Dylan was probably capable of defending herself. I think Dylan, you know, did she arm herself with something? Or, you know, but it just doesn't make sense. They were on the ground floor. They could have gone right outside. You know, Hunter J was right next door. I
still have questions on whether Hunter J and his girlfriend weren't at the house when this happened. I got this weird gut feeling there were more people at the house when this happened than what's being let out. And that's why I think that, there's potentially maybe somebody that's going to testify to what they heard or saw or some at trial. But I don't know that. I don't know that. I just feel like every time we've seen this house or any type of interaction with this home, we've seen Hunter there. And we've even seen Hunter's girlfriend, Emily or whatever, answer the door at this home
Absolutely.
when cops are there. So, I mean, come on.
Well, what was with the why did we hear in the beginning about this frozen shock phase? What was that all about? Where did that even come from? I mean, I feel like that's weird because in the beginning we heard about this frozen shock phase that Dylan went into. And of course we all called BS, but
Right.
we did hear that. And then where did that even come from?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought because I'm thinking back to, I mean, I followed this case since the day it broke. And I know law enforcement was very hesitant to release anything about the surviving. They pretty much portrayed them as completely asleep at the beginning. And it took quite a while to weasel out that they actually weren't fully asleep. And then it wasn't until the PCA came out to where it was actually shown that Dylan was a witness. And then that's when I believe everybody spun frozen shock phase, but I don't think that came from law enforcement or any documents or anybody within the prosecution. I think that literally came, through the social media platform and maybe potentially even mainstream media. It's probably mainstream media that started to talk about these young ladies being in program. I remember hearing that quite a bit at the beginning. And I just said BS, BS. They heard everything. There's no doubt in my mind they heard it all. And
Right.
people would bang on me, that I didn't know what I was talking about. I'm like, dude, they heard it all. Even if you're in frozen shock phase, you heard it. I mean, you wouldn't be in frozen shock phase if you didn't. So,
well, and going back to that statement we've been told about, I'm here to help you. That kind of makes me think of a second person coming in to assist in either a cleanup or assist in some part of the crime. That's not going to be someone coming in telling the victims, I'm here to help you. That's going to be someone coming in saying, all right, you've got an issue. I'm here to help you fix, to cover up the issue or to, something, you know what I mean? Like, that's not like something somebody would say to a victim.
Maybe that's why she thought she saw a fireman. I mean, it's so odd. It's so odd that, we're hearing about firemen and vacuum cleaners. I realize how intoxicated, if she was that intoxicated, because to me, that's the perfect response from Dylan. If she doesn't want to give up too much information, is just to say, hey, I was really intoxicated. I have no idea what was going on.
True.
Real quick on this one, I'll give my opinion first, and then I'll throw it over to you. Will we see crime scene photos eventually of this case? Absolutely not.
I agree. I don't think we will.
Not of any type of the bodies or anything of that nature. Will we see after they've removed the bodies potentially? I don't even think we'll see the blood. I think we'll see it after they tore apart the inside of the house and took out the very evidence that they felt like they need to remove out of this home. I don't think we're ever going to see anything graphic come out of anything regarding this crime scene. That's why they tore it down. I mean, they tore it down for a reason.
I agree. And I don't think it was because they were just trying to erase the memory. I think that, I mean, how do you tear that house down and then do all these things in the middle of the night, haul it away and bury it in the ground in an undisclosed location? And I believe I heard them say that they were worried that people were going to try to get souvenirs from this house. So that's why they buried it underground. But there's been plenty of heinous crimes that have been committed where the house is still standing. It's still there.
Yeah.
I think the Amityville Horror House is still there. I think people live in that house.
I think so too. Yeah, it's just crazy that they would want to tear it down. I mean, why would they tear it down?
Because they're going to make a not to scale replica demonstrative they could wheel in on a table and let the jury play with the Tinker toys while they're trying to talk about a trial. It's another showcase joke of how badly this case has gone. I think the defense actually in that scenario agreed to have it torn down because I think they truly believe that leaves a lot of open doors for the juries to have even more questions in regards to this crime. That would make it harder to potentially find Brian Koberger guilty because they're not going to be able to put together the puzzle pieces of the crime scene, and they're not going to be confident with a full-out guilty verdict when they can't put it all together. And I'm getting the mouse taken out of my hand.
No, go ahead and answer your question.
In regards to this question here from Susan Russo, why was the partner of Rosie checking out and mentioning there was no stairwell to Kaylee's balcony? Oh, Lord. Thank God I'm having my eyes repaired, man. I'm telling you, tomorrow is step one. We got our first surgery tomorrow. I was kind of excited to get this process rolling, lucky, and now I'm nervous. But and then obviously at the same point of pointing out the no stairs to that second balcony up there, they also took a picture of Kaylee's ID with his private phone. And I think we've all scrutinized this. We've all discussed this. We didn't feel real confident or comfortable with this scenario. But what's your opinion on that?
I thought it was odd that they were there for a noise complaint in the middle of the day. I mean, you're talking about this house is right. This house, who was calling in these noise complaints? I know that there's been a few speculations about who's been calling in these noise complaints. But I always wondered, because it didn't even seem like I didn't hear any music in that video. Did you hear any music?
He said it was not a called in noise complaint. He was at a noise complaint up the street. And the reason why they stopped there on the way back was to warn them about the speaker that was seen just inside the back door and let them know a noise complaint would be 3. But what I didn't understand about all that, like I was listening, I was like, okay, he's giving them a warning. But then he literally gave them a warning that the very next one would be an actual $300 fine. And I'm like, what are you giving them a warning for? Where the next one would be the fine, considering they never did anything to get the initial warning.
Right.
So none of it made a lot of sense to me.
Well, and if you notice, Hunter J hung around out there.
He's always there.
Yeah, he's always there. But he hung around out there while that was going on.
And Dylan Mortensen was the one that ran from the back slider door into the house, into her room. You watch her right in the back slider run. She was right there too when the cops came up, and she ran to her room.
Yeah.
It's just such an odd.
Maybe that was underage drinking.
You got Hunter, who's always there with the rubber bands on his arms, watching over the women like he's so protective. Yet his best friend's Ethan, but he's hanging out with the girls. And what's weird about that is he's Ethan's best friend, but he's hanging out with Dylan. Ethan wasn't there when that went down. Dylan was. So Ethan was hanging out with Kaylee and Dylan, but supposedly Ethan's best friend. Something's just so weird, man. I'm just like,
it's odd. The whole thing is odd. Well, and if you remember when you could hear law enforcement on their body cams when they were approaching that house, when they were having that big party, when Emma Bailey walked out of that house with her friend and they're approaching the house, it almost seemed like these officers kind of were targeting this house, that they were consistently targeting this house. And, they found the alcohol in that backpack that was in front of the house, and they were pouring it all out and making a big joke about that they were pouring out these White Claws, and it almost seemed like a game with between campus police and the people in this house.
You know, it's weird though. I find the connection of that house when it comes to the officers and everybody just kind of rotating around it. My connection within that home is Dylan. Because it seems as though, look, Emma Bailey is good friends with Dylan.
Right.
Emma Bailey was probably over there hanging out with Dylan. So then I'm thinking Hunter J. And if people want to go down the narcotic line of things, I've been around the block a time or two. I mean, I know you've been around. I'm not saying you've personally done narcotic, but you've been around people that are known in that type of situation.
Yeah.
There's always a connection. There's always a connection. No matter where you go, whatever house it's involved with, there's a direct connection that everybody goes to that house for that. That doesn't mean everybody in the house is directly connected to it, but there's one connection. And I'm finding that through everything that I look at, every angle that I look at, it comes back to Dylan.
Yeah.
Every time it comes back to Dylan. And I can't figure out why, because it's like, so when the cops came and they got Maddie on the phone, because remember how Hunter and them answered the door and said nobody from the house was home and everybody was drinking in the home. And obviously Maddie's on the phone talking with the officers or whatever that might be. The connection to that is, you know who was home? The one underage person that's not allowed to drink, Dylan. And she wouldn't come to the door. So when the noise complaint comes and Hunter and Kaylee come out the back door, who ran from the door? Dylan. Why? What'd she have to run for? What was so wrong that she had to run? She didn't want to be connected with the cops. That tells me narcotics, dude. Especially when you got Emma Bailey in and out of your home on camera. We see it on camera. Nobody has to debate whether she was ever at that home.
She was there.
See it with our own eyes. And I watched Emma Bailey with my own eyes pull narcotics out of the crack of her butt and throw it in the garbage can at the police station.
Right. Right.
Come
Definitely something going on there with that. But I think I agree. You know, the whole Dylan situation, you know, and that's what makes it hard, is because, you know, you don't want to throw someone under the bus. You don't, but everything, you're right. Everything seems sketchy around Dylan. And, you know, I don't know. I don't get the feel. Well, I guess she wasn't 21 yet. You know, she was a freshman.
No, and I get it. She would get in trouble for underage drinking. However, the cops can't bust you in your own house for underage drinking when they don't have a reason to come into your house.
Right. Well, that's one of the things that didn't make sense to me when Steve Gonsalves said in that interview that he thought that they didn't call 911 because they were scared because they had alcohol in their bedrooms. But there were people who were 21 who lived in that house. So it seems they could have put that alcohol on the kitchen counter.
Well, you know, it doesn't matter if you're under 21 and you have alcohol in your bedroom. They have to have a reason to enter your home.
Right.
If you don't give them reason, meaning permission to come into your home, they would never find the beer in your room anyway. I'm sorry, Steve G, that was a cowardly comment to make of the reasoning why Dylan Mortensen didn't want to have cops come to the house.
It didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me.
When a 911 call for someone's life is made, they don't give a damn who has alcohol in that house. They don't care about beer in the house.
Are they worried about the victims?
Dude, you could have had a pound of marijuana sitting on your counter and they wouldn't have given a darn about it at that moment. Not a darn about it. And if people legitimately think that they can make that excuse, and people like you or I that actually know the laws of search of a home and seizure and all of that, you can't come into my home and bust me for underage alcohol if I didn't give you permission to come into my home in the first place. And even if you did come into my home and found alcohol, you can't bust me for it anyway if other people over the age of 21 are living in that home.
Right. Yeah, that didn't make sense to me at all. I mean, that made no. There's really no good excuse for not calling 911. There's really not. And then I feel like the more information that has come out with these text messages between Dylan and Bethany, and then the 911 call, I feel like that makes these roommates look even worse. I feel like at that point, you're like, there's really no excuse at all. There was no frozen shock phase. Nobody was frozen in shock. There's no reason that they couldn't call 911. They were calling everybody else. Why couldn't they call 911?
Exactly.
And that's another thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to the house, because in my opinion, it would have been very, very important. And I know it's not common practice to have a jury walk through this crime scene. And I know they cut a lot of the floors out and used a lot of chemicals and stuff like that. But one of the most important aspects of the house to me, and the reason to preserve it, would be because I would be curious to know what Dylan could hear. So if you don't have the actual house, then you can't really do that accurately. But I don't feel like there's any way that Dylan did not hear exactly what was going on inside that house. I just don't. And I feel like those walls were paper thin. I mean, if you've got body fluid seeping through the walls, and you've got, if she can hear everything else that's going on around her, but she doesn't hear the fighting going on upstairs. She doesn't hear everything that's going on. She hears the dog barking. She hears people in the bathroom. She hears everything else, but she can't put two and two together that something really bad is happening. And I have a hard time believing that someone who is losing their life by being attacked with a knife sounds the same as some kids partying.
Dude, I'll tell you just from personal experience, and I was in the penitentiary where you have rock solid brick walls, steel doors. You know what the inside of penitentiaries are all about, man. You got the thick glass, you got all this stuff. And I'm on one end of the run, and I could hear people talking and beating the crap out of each other all the way at the end of the run with 40 cells between me and them. And I could hear every dink and dunk and everything going on. Don't tell me that Dylan Mortensen didn't hear every single breath, word, missed punch, missed stab, moving furniture, steps on the stairwell. Dude, she didn't miss any of what happened in this home. Neither did Bethany.
I agree.
Neither did Bethany.
Well, they might not have heard everything, but they definitely heard something. Because, I mean, if you're like really as drunk as she is, you're not going to hear maybe every noise. Maybe you're just kind of out of it a little bit. But you definitely hear something, and you definitely know that something is wrong.
Dude, they were 6 feet above her.
No, I know.
They were directly right above her. Just imagine our neighbors right now on our top floor apartment above us, walking on the floor above us. I could hear every step they take. And this is supposedly where Dylan was in her room, and Maddie's room, where all the violence happened, was directly above her. You heard every bit of that, but you know what the problem is everything she's describing she heard is on the second floor, which would have actually been harder to hear than what was happening directly above her. The second floor is down the hall, around the corner, with a kitchen with a buzzing refrigerator and things like that in between you. I'm not saying that you wouldn't have heard it, but it's harder because you got more walls. What happened above her is just the floor above you. It's hollow. You heard it. And he doesn't talk as much about it.
I definitely agree that they heard stuff.
And being drunk, just like Silver Fox said, being drunk doesn't mean you're deaf. I
Right.
actually, when I'm drunk, I'm almost more focused until I start to doze off and I completely pass out, fall asleep. Then I'm out. When I'm awake, I'm focused. I am
Right.
on it because I'm trying to figure out whether I got to go puke or whether I'm going to be able to make it to the next beer. You know, I'm like, I'm focused right now. But uh, even if I was as sloshed as I've been in my lifetime, thank God those days are over, by the way, but I still would have known what was happening here, and I still would have come out of my room. I would have still looked to see what was up, and then I would have got a hold of somebody to help me if there was something devastating happening in my house that I couldn't deal with. Like, I would have called you, Lucky, even 8 states away. I would have said, Lucky, I don't know what to do, man. Can you get a hold of somebody for me? Like, I'm drunk right now. I don't know what's up. But man, I think somebody just lost their life in my house. Like, this is bad. I
Right.
would have left it on somebody that could have potentially helped me. If I was in a bad spot, they could have helped me get the help, even if
Right.
I didn't know how to hit 911. If I only had speed dial that said Lucky compared to 911, I could have still found a way.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt they heard stuff for sure. I was just only saying the intoxicated part for maybe not doing, I don't know. There's not an excuse for why they wouldn't call, but not making good decisions, obviously, when you're drunk. But when something like that happens, you call.
Lucky, do you think they're potentially that they've made the deal with her if you testify at trial and give up the information that you have in regards to what you saw, what you heard, we won't charge you with what we could potentially charge you with? Do you think any discussion like that happened? Because remember the guy that came out and he did some sort of interview or YouTube or something where he didn't give up his real name or whatever. I think he even made a channel and put out one video that said Dylan Mortensen was pushed into what she had to say. She didn't say it on her own. She was pushed into it.
Right.
I just wonder what your thoughts on that would be.
I think that's totally, I mean, if she didn't know what she was seeing, she said, I could be imagining this. I could have been dreaming. I don't know what I was seeing. I mean, that's a bad situation. But then if you have investigators who are putting these thoughts in her mind, well, were you possibly seeing a guy in a balaclava? Was he taller than you? She said that she didn't know what she was seeing. She didn't even know, she didn't even know. That's what confuses me about this balaclava is that when she was first giving her statement, she didn't even know what type of mask this was. She didn't know what it was covering. She said all she could see was one eyebrow, that she didn't know if it was covering his mouth, or his forehead. I don't think Dylan, either she didn't know anything or she's lying. And that's just my opinion.
And I want to reference something real quick, Lucky, and I don't, I don't want to do it in a mean or a rude way, but for all these people that keep coming saying Dylan Mortensen was not at the house, I'm going to answer it one very simple way. The defense team for Brian Colbert and Taylor Massoff stood in the courtroom and 100% confirmed Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk were in the home from the time of the crime all the way until 911 was called. So I get there's content creators out there that are giving out information that Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk were not at this crime scene, that they went to a hotel. That's all misinterpreted because the hotel stay was the night after the crime when prosecution put everybody up, actually law enforcement, put everybody up into a hotel room because that's what they do when your home is a crime scene. They get you out of the crime scene, they get you into a hotel room, and they conduct their interviews. I've been through the process.
Well, not only the defense, but even the prosecution said that they were in the home. So both sides are saying they were clearly in the home.
I don't understand why everybody wants to come out and say, actually, I do. Like, let me preface this way. For those that want to truly believe that Brian Koberger's innocent of this crime, we 100% believe in innocent until proven guilty. So I'm not arguing innocent until proven guilty. But there's no reasoning to go completely conspiracy theory against not only what the prosecution is putting into documentation to the court that's going to be presented as evidence at trial, but the defense attorneys of Brian Koberger are 100% in agreement with it, and they're going to utilize that very same evidence to defend their client, Brian Koberger, that everybody wants to be innocent. So now if we're going to go ahead and go down this road and say Dylan Mortensen, Bethany Funk were not at the home when all of this happened, let's just shred up all of that evidence that the defense team wants to utilize to defend their client, Brian Koberger, throw it in the garbage can and say it's not worthy of even protecting Brian Koberger either. This is where we have to go down a walking line of factual truth. I'm sorry, Lucky, but this is what's so hard. We want facts. We want truth. We want to be able to discuss true crime in the best manner. Now, could they have potentially left? Sure. At noon in a cop car to go get interrogated.
Well, and I mean, they had the phone data. I mean, why, if they could determine that Jack D was at home, couldn't they determine that where everybody was at that time? I mean, if they were able to,
you don't think they would have got the hotel records? You don't
Absolutely.
think there's a credit card on file, ladies and gentlemen. You got to leave a deposit. You
There's
know, every
cameras.
hotel now makes you leave a deposit, right? I mean, that's mandatory. You got to do it. Even Motel 6. Got to leave a deposit.
Well, there's a hotel camera too to see them.
You're going to have every camera. You're going to have everything. And I get it, man. I've sat down. I've watched some of these content creators work, and it's great stories. It's great stories. Man, it gets interesting. You really get engaged in it. You really want to believe it. It's not factual evidence that's being presented at trial. And you don't think Ann Taylor would have shredded this up by now? Lucky, I mean, come on, man. Let's be serious about this. You don't think Ann Taylor would have shred up Dylan Mortensen if they had a hotel room and all of this stuff was lies? You don't think this would be shred up? You don't think there'd be motion after motion to the court about this? I mean, oh, man. I get lost sometimes, man. I get lost.
I think that Dylan and Bethany were probably looked into more than just about anybody. But if you can determine that Jack D was at home in his house, it seems like it'd be pretty easy to determine where Dylan and Bethany were at that time. If you can't determine that, because they were actually using their phones. I mean, we know they were using their phones at that time. So it seems like it would be pretty easy to determine where they were at. But if they can't determine where Dylan and Bethany were at by their cell phones, then how they can't really determine where Jack D was at.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, even the prosecution confirms and believes that they were at the house. I mean, they were the ones saying that even at the courthouse, they're like, oh, they were scared or they were in frozen shock phase. But they were at the house. They confirmed they're at the house. So it's not even just the defense. It's also the prosecutors. So if all parties are in agreement, they're at the house. I'm pretty sure they were at the house.
You know, I see somebody saying that they could bring Dylan Mortensen on as an alternate suspect. Look, I stated earlier, Lucky, I said this could be an opportunity if Ann Taylor can dig deep enough to find evidence, actual evidence that Dylan Mortensen had something to do with this crime. I bring in some, social media stuff that she talked about it prior to it happening, showcase she had some cleaning ability within the house. There's so many angles that could be done. But if Ann Taylor can't bring direct evidence into the May 15th hearing, Dylan Mortensen's name won't be said. And I just, you know, at the end of the day, I just want people to understand this is going to trial. Brian Koberger is going to trial.
Yeah, I don't think there's any way he pleads out or anything
No,
like
he's
that.
not
It's going to
pleading out.
trial.
But what I'm saying, this case right now is by no means anywhere near a dismissal. How do you
Right.
feel about that, Lucky? Hopefully I'm not just running you off here and just saying, I'm just saying my feeling.
No. I'm glad. I think that you know, you're right. If he pleads out, that is definitely not going to be, you know, a sign that he's innocent. I'm curious to know. This is my thing, and this is kind of something I just want to talk about. So I feel as though, what if, and we don't know this to be factual, but what if the feds were monitoring Brian Koberger in Pennsylvania before he moved back to Washington? And does that put us in a different place because they already would have had eyes on him before these crimes occurred? You know, as far as how they found Brian Koberger, because that's something that has still always, that I still think about, is Ann Taylor said, what led law enforcement to my client? And that's something that I still think about all the time.
Yeah, I agree. Did you need to take a minute?
I'm gonna take a minute. I'll be right back.
Awesome. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's just say hi to those of you that are here in the chat. It's been flying so quick. We've got a great crowd in here this evening. We're definitely appreciative of you all being here. And I do want to lay a preface to this, and I'm not being argumentative in regards to whether there's innocence or guilt here. I just really, I hope that people fully understand that the course that we're on right now is a trial against Brian Koberger. And I know there's a big hearing and there's a lot of discussion transpiring right now about alternative suspects. And I've spoken many of times throughout, you know, the entirety of the 2.5 years. And I felt like there were more people involved in this case. And I've never once said that I felt like Brian Koberger was 100% guilty of this or a part of this crime. I believe in innocence until proven guilty. I, however, know what it takes to be able to go through the process of proving alternative suspects or proving somebody else's angle of committing this crime compared to Ann Taylor and Massoff going into the courtroom just to get a jury to deem Brian Koberger as an innocent man based upon the fact he did not commit the crime. Many people are just portraying that Ann Taylor is going to attack this and she's going to be able to prove on May 15th that somebody else committed this crime, and they're going to drop all the charges against Brian Koberger, and that's not the case. Even if Ann Taylor were to bring in evidence against somebody else that could have potentially committed this crime, Brian Koberger is going to trial. There is no dismissal at this point in this case. It's not happening. We can file complaints with the Idaho courts. We can file complaints against the law enforcement and everything that's happening before our eyes. And I would never tell anybody to not speak their mind or their opinions or the way that you feel. But be very careful when you look into, I guess everybody's leaving me, so I'm on my own here. Be very careful that when you look into the way that the court process works, you have to understand it's going to go step by step. The Supreme Court, not only the Idaho Supreme Court, who actually handpicked Judge Hippler to be the judge of this case. Remember, please remember, Brian Koberger and his defense attorneys motioned for the change of venue and were granted that change of venue. And the Supreme Court picked Judge Hippler. The prosecution didn't pick Judge Hippler. University of Idaho did not pick Judge Hippler. The Gonzalez family did not pick Judge Hippler. The Idaho Supreme Court picked Judge Hippler. They have their eyes on this case. Not only does the Idaho Supreme Court have their eyes on this case, the federal Supreme Court has their eyes on this case. It's the biggest case in the United States happening right here, right now. It's going to trial. If Bryan Kohberger were to be found guilty, he's awarded automatic appeals, and that's where it will be before the Supreme Court. And they can take into consideration everything that's in your guys' hearts and feelings. They're going to look at. They're going to look at it. But right now, this is where we're at. And we're going to trial. Judge Hippler's the judge. Bill Thompson, Jeff Nye, Hewitt, whatever his name is, are going to be the prosecutors. And we see the defense team, and we know the defendant. It's Bryan Kohberger. I wish Ann Taylor and the defense team all the luck on May 15th to be able to present a case that could potentially show evidence that there are other perpetrators of this crime. And then we can open our eyes, because trust me, even Lucky, that's sitting right here with me today, would love the opportunity to talk more true crime with actual true facts that could bring all of this together and make more sense with more perps, more angles, more things to talk about. We want that. But we're also not at the point where we're going to scream conspiracy. I just won't do it. I won't do it, ladies and gentlemen. I will not scream conspiracy. I've been through the system. I've been through it. I've been to trials. I've hated my judges. I've hated my prosecutors. I want Ann Taylor to go to bat and mask off and put up a good defense. I want to hear what the experts have to say. I want to hear the testimony of everybody. And at that point, we can formulate our thoughts of who is guilty and who is innocent based upon the facts.
I agree.
I agree. To you, Lucky.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, that's what I want to see. I just want to see the evidence. And I want to hear, I think we're going to hear a lot in this trial. There's going to be a lot of people called to the stand. And we're going to hear a lot of information. As Massoth said, a lot of people are going to be character witnesses and are going to be on that stand talking about Bryan Kohberger. And, in my opinion, there's a lot of coincidences that are going on in this case. There's a lot of things that do not favor Bryan Kohberger. And there's a lot of things that, we can question, of course, because like I said, I mean, being odd or being socially awkward is not, does not mean that someone's going to go out and commit this type of crime. This is a quadruple homicide. This is something that it's huge. A quadruple homicide is huge. And I think that, Bryan Kohberger being odd or socially awkward that doesn't mean that he's capable of committing this crime. Like I said, there's a lot of things that don't add up for me when it comes to this entire case. The suspect, the investigation, the roommates, there's so much that just doesn't add up. And I think that solid evidence is what we're going to need to see. The circumstantial stuff, it just is what it is. The knife sheath, I've always felt a certain way about this knife sheath because, like I said, it seems as though if Bryan Kohberger's DNA was on this knife sheath, it seems as though it would be in other places in this house. It would be somewhere other than just this knife sheath. And think about this for a second. Now, they found a very minuscule amount of touch DNA on this button snap of this knife sheath. So why wasn't Bryan Kohberger's DNA all over this knife sheath if it belonged to him? And a lot of people have said, well, maybe it's because he wiped it down. But why would he wipe it down? He's not expecting to leave it in the crime scene. You know, it doesn't make sense that this DNA was just limited to just this small area of the button snap. His DNA would have been all over that knife sheath. It seems, you know, I mean, it wouldn't make sense for him to wipe it down if he left it there on accident.
You know, and that's, you know, here I go. I just went on the rant and rave that I'm not into conspiracies. And all
Did I miss it?
But no, I'm just saying at the end of the day, I don't think Brian Koberger walked that knife sheath into that house. That's why I say my perspective on this crime is a multi-perp commission of this crime. It's not one person. I don't believe, and I have to say this carefully, because even though I say innocent until proven guilty, I'm not going to deem anybody fully innocent. I'm not going to point the finger at anybody as being guilty. That's why I don't name names. That's why I don't point at people and say they're potentially the one that committed this crime, because I don't want to even do the same thing to Brian Koberger. I don't want to point at Brian Koberger and say, I know you committed this crime, because I don't. I don't believe Brian Koberger carried that knife sheath into this crime. I at the end of the day, don't feel like Brian Koberger carried a knife into this crime. I don't think Brian Koberger used a knife in this crime, meaning I don't think Brian Koberger was actually the life taker of this crime. But that still does not fully make me believe he couldn't have played some role in this crime, meaning, hey, dude, I saw your car on camera in the neighborhood. Did you drop somebody off like at 3:30, 4 o'clock? You know, were you supposed to pick him back up at 4:30, 4 o'clock? What happened? You know, there's other things that could be. Was Brian Koberger the one that came in that said, I'm here to help you clean up the crime scene real quick so we can get out of here in more time? Because I'm telling you, if 3 or 4 people are involved, a 15-minute time frame becomes actually more believable. You know, I just, at the end of the day, Lucky, I'm at a point, I'm kind of glad. God, this is so bad to say. I'm kind of glad I'm having these surgeries just all stacked in a row here coming up, because that's going to afford me some time to really step back as I recover to rejuvenate a little bit, get the mind a little clearer, a little less frustrated, a little back to the normal open-mindedness, to where right now, I mean, it's just hard, because anytime you or I have something to say, I've got 92 other people just saying I'm completely wrong in something I have to say. And it's like, dude, I didn't even say anything that was meant to point at anybody as being involved. Like, all I was talking about was the system and how it's working. And you just told me I'm fully wrong because my theory's wrong. And I didn't even know I made a theory. Like, I didn't even know I had a theory, Lucky. I don't know.
Did I miss something? I mean, I think that's why, isn't that why we're all here? I mean, aren't we all here to talk about our ideas and our differences in opinions, right, and what we see? You know, I feel like that's why we're all here, right?
I'm not here to solve the crime.
Right.
I'm not here to solve the crime.
It's not going to happen. We don't have all of the information. And then, you know, I think that's something that's so important, is that we be able to look at the new information that's coming out, because there's a lot of new information that's still going to come out. There's going to be a lot of information that comes out. And as long as we look at it with an open mind, you know, that's going to be important, because I feel like for almost 2 years, we have been asking the questions. We've been saying, we need more information. We need more information. And then we get that information and it's like, oh, that's a conspiracy. Well, right. Why are we asking for more information if we're not going to look at it seriously? If we're not really going to look at this new information that's coming out, why are we even asking for it?
Right.
Well, we're not going to really know everything until we get to the trial and both sides lay out all the facts and all the evidence that they have. Then we can really weigh everything out. We can really dive through everything, because now we have all of the facts from both sides. We have all the evidence from both sides. Right now, we still don't have everything. We still don't know everything. So It's hard to
you can't really solve the case until you know all the evidence.
Well, and here's kind of a point of view. Let's discuss this real quick, Lucky, because I know it hits you as much as it hits me. So let's talk about this knife sheath real quick. We know that it's been found at the crime scene. We don't exactly know what position it was in at the crime scene. We only know what we think we know based on what people have said, whether it be under Maddie, side of Maddie. We don't know. We haven't seen a picture. We don't know what they're going to testify to in court, whether it was half under the comforter, not under the comforter, or any of that. We already know the PCA isn't relevant. It was not very factual. I think it's a disgusting document that was presented to get Brian Koberger's arrest. I think it's improper. I think that should have been thrown out. I think at the end of the day, the arrest probably should have been thrown out. They should have had to refile and do a lot of things. But at the end of the day, Brian Koberger's sitting in jail. His DNA, no matter how small or what version of DNA it is, was found on that sheet. So now the best thing that most people can say in regards to that is that knife sheath was placed. Okay, I can agree that the knife sheath was placed. But then when they changed the word to planted, now my question, and I'll start here with you, Lucky, when you get the interpretation of planted, if you were to portray it to this case, would you think planted by the perp that committed the crime or planted by law enforcement? Because that's what I get in my mind that people are trying to tell me that I need to think.
That it was planted by law enforcement?
Law enforcement or another perp. Planted, not like it fell out of their hand in the middle of the crime or anything of that nature. It had to be planted.
I mean, I get it's possible. I think it's possible, but
By law enforcement?
I think it's possible by anybody. I think it's possible by anybody who walked into that house. I think it's possible that it could have been planted. But I think on the other hand, something that you and I have talked a lot about is that I don't believe that every law enforcement agency that worked on this case is out to get Brian Koberger. I just don't. I don't believe that the feds and that Pennsylvania State Police and Idaho State Police and Pullman local PD and Moscow PD and the prosecution and the town of Idaho. I don't believe that all of these people are conspiring against Brian Koberger. There's something else. There's something, I just don't believe that. I don't believe that, if the sheath was planted, why is Brian Koberger the target of?
Why is it only his DNA on it in a minuscule trace DNA way when you could put real DNA on that? They could have easily got real DNA from Brian Koberger and put it on that.
Right.
He applied for positions with law enforcement in the local community. All they had to get was that application. All they had to get was any DNA from the lab where he worked, any DNA from his car when he parked at his apartment complex. Any form of DNA they could have had. When they put substantially more on this sheath and potentially not put other people's DNA, like blood DNA, on that sheath as well? I mean, we're talking about a minuscule touch DNA of Brian Koberger, and then when they did the testing, they found a mixture of other DNA, including blood, on that sheath.
Right. I agree. And this is my thing, is that would this be the first time that law enforcement has messed around with evidence? Of course not. It's happened. No. It's happened before. But then we have to ask, why Brian Koberger? Why did they pluck him out and decide, let's really put it to this guy right now. Let's really make him look guilty. I mean, you would still have the people who committed this crime out in the community. So what would that really accomplish? If you're just trying to frame Brian Koberger, what about the people who really did commit the crime, and why would they be protected? That it's something I think about a lot, because it is odd. This whole case is odd. It looks strange because there's a lot of secrecy, and is there a possibility that there's some shady things going on? Absolutely. I believe that 100% that there's some shady things going on. But why would everyone be trying to frame Bryan Kohberger? I mean, I think it's funny because you and I were talking last night, and I said, if this whole, if the whole country is trying to frame Bryan Kohberger, he must be the most unliked individual in the world. I mean, why would so many people be trying to frame Bryan Kohberger? That's my question, because there's systems in place and there's levels of this. So there's different levels of law enforcement. There's different investigators. There's different prosecutors. Why would all of these people be conspiring against Bryan Kohberger?
Now, seeing an argument that I guess I could potentially make that maybe makes a little bit of sense is Bryan Kohberger worked at a university as a teacher's aide. He mingled with numerous students on a daily basis that he graded their papers. He touched their shoulders when he would talk to them. He could have potentially transferred DNA to another individual that was a perp of the crime.
Right.
That they touched the knife sheath while wearing gloves, but they didn't know they had Bryan. That's a conversation I could have. That's a conversation I could literally get into. And trust me, no. I've spoken from the very beginning, everybody. I felt like this investigation was one of the worst I'd ever seen. I think it was conducted in an inappropriate manner by uneducated and very untrained and incapable individuals like a Brett Payne that conducted this investigation. I don't think they're capable of solving a crime like this at all. But what I also don't want people literally thinking is all of a sudden, I don't know how to say this without saying it the way I don't want to say it. A group of people that commit this crime but want to put it onto somebody else so they don't get caught don't typically go hand pick somebody to pin it on. They just try to get whatever they can to get it away from themselves. So let's say a group of people went to commit this crime and somehow Bryan Kohberger's DNA ended up on the sheet. How would they know to all point at Bryan Kohberger and use his name and accuse him as the perp of the crime? How would they become informants against Bryan Kohberger?
Right.
Is he that special? Am I missing something, Lucky?
That's what I'm looking for. That's why I keep saying I'm looking for this connection somewhere, because where does Bryan Kohberger fit into all of this? That's what I'm having a hard time understanding is how does he fit in as a suspect, first of all? But then if he's not the suspect and he's being framed, how does he fit into that situation? How did he get into that situation? I mean, we've heard that Bryan Kohberger may not have been the most likable person. We've heard that. But I mean, I just, if you're trying to frame Bryan Kohberger, then you obviously still have whoever committed this crime out there in your community. And you run the risk of that information coming out later on. So, I mean, there's no way that you're going to be able to hide that type of information. Somebody, if there's more than one person involved, someone's going to talk eventually. That information is going to come out.
I think it's happening.
I think so too.
Exactly what you just said is the tip that Ann Taylor got, and that's the connection to the university. Because I see somebody over here saying, and I agree, I'm going to break this into two segments of how I think this is being portrayed. There's either a connection of individuals that are connected to these very students through the university itself that are going to start sharing information on each other. And that's the tips the defense are getting. And those are the ones they're investigating, because at the very hearing, they said, we are following a tip and now canvassing the University of Idaho cameras following an individual trying to connect the dots. It was very specific and very well talked about. On the other hand, if you want to look at it in the other direction of an alternative perp, you need to start looking at who's actually directly connected to Brian Kohlberger. There's a connection there if Brian Kohlberger's a part of this crime. There's a connection there with somebody that needs to be made, and it's not the victims. That's not the connection. It's a connection with another person or two people that are connected to the victims. But Brian Kohlberger's going to have a connection, and that's how his DNA ended up as a piece of evidence at this crime scene, is through that connection. If Brian Kohlberger didn't play a part in the crime.
Right. Well,
Now,
think about this. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, the defense is chasing University of Idaho suspect. There's no doubt about it. They're chasing somebody on the University of Idaho, and I think exactly what you said is happening. People are starting to talk.
Yeah, well, I don't think they could keep them quiet forever. But this is so let's go all the way back to the beginning, and let's talk about law enforcement seemingly knowing exactly what was going on from the first time that they got there. I mean, they immediately called it a targeted attack. They immediately, shut down what was it? The Idaho emergency. What was that called that they had put out, the vandal alert? So they immediately came out and said that these attacks were targeted, and they seem to know that. So what was it inside that house that made them believe that immediately? Was it either something that was in the house, or was it an informant?
That's the question. And that's why it's going to be very interesting to watch all this play out. But I'm very interested in the May 15th date. I'm very interested in the very specific guidelines that Hitler set when it comes to the alternative perp defense, to where the defense could actually name scenarios and name names, because without that, they can't do it. All the defense can do if this goes to trial with an alternative open-minded perp situation that Brian Kohlberger didn't commit the crime, if they don't fulfill what Judge Hitler is asking, is there was other evidence found at the crime scene that could potentially lead to other people, because, the prosecution failed in their motion, and the judge left that door open for that they could speak upon other evidence found at the crime scene. But they're not going to be able to pinpoint, like, here's a very good scenario that if they don't win this battle on the 15th, Ann Taylor and Brian Kohlberger's defense attorneys cannot step up to the plate at trial and say, by the way, two of the victims' families were involved in heavy narcotic usage and distribution. They were caught and potentially told on other people, and this is retribution for that. I don't think people understand that. If they don't win this battle on the 15th, they cannot talk about that. That may come as a shock to people. Judge Hitler will close that down in a heartbeat, and the minute that is spoken upon at trial, it will be objected, and the objection will be completely 100% ruled upon in the prosecution's favor. He'll shut that down, because what evidence are they going to provide?
Right. Well, and we know he likes to shut down the defense.
He does. And that's why I'm telling you, this May 15th is going to be very interesting to see. I think we're going to learn a lot about how this trial is going to go on May 15th. If he shuts that down, Judge Hitler has shut down almost every avenue of defense outside of the basic Brian Kohlberger didn't do this defense,
right,
that he possibly can.
Right. Well, and I've heard a lot of people say, why is Ann Taylor doing this? Why is she doing that? Why is she throwing things at the wall and hoping they stick? And I always say that's her job. You know, her
Yes.
job is
Yeah.
to protect it. Her job is to defend her client. And so she's going to try everything. And that's what she should be doing. She should, if I'm Brian Kohberger, I want my attorney trying everything. I don't care how ridiculous it sounds. I don't care how time consuming it is. If I'm looking at, if I'm looking at the death penalty, I want my attorney to try everything. So I don't blame Ann Taylor. I think that she's doing everything that she can to defend her client, and that's her job. So of course she's going to present everything.
Well, that's another thing too, and people need to understand this too. Nothing that an informant gave to law enforcement or to the prosecution could be utilized at trial, because Brian Kohberger has the full rights to, go at and question his accusers, and an informant's information will not be presented. An informant's information only led the investigation to go in the routes that they began looking at certain things or certain people or what they did. So a lot of people that are thinking that these informants are going to come into play when it's heading towards trial. They don't come in play. They mean nothing. Their work is done. The informant's work is done. They're gone. They're out of this case. They're not taking the stand. They're not talking about nothing. They gave their tips and then they went on their way, and law enforcement utilized those tips and utilized it in their investigation. So they don't have to discuss anything that an informant gave them information. They're not going to. They're not going to share that. And look, the judge isn't even going to force anything more than just stating that they got to Brian Kohberger based on a tip. That's not even going to be the tip that they did this whole run-of-the-mill IGG thing through all of these hoops and hooplas. All they're going to say is they got a tip. That's it. And it led them to Brian Kohberger. So, as much as I hate to say it, because I 100% want to see a fair trial, and I know everybody wants Brian Kohberger to get the fair shake, innocent until proved guilty. And May 15th is going to be a big day. I think we all need to keep our eyes open. Me, I'll have my eyes closed because they'll be newly surgically being worked on. So I will be face down, not looking at nothing, but I'll listen to Lucky when he calls me, and Jen when she tells me that I haven't done the dishes or anything in weeks.
Thank you, Michelle Francis. I appreciate that. Thank you for the super chat.
What's your 2 cents, since I've just out talked to you and you haven't got anything in on this in a while, Jim?
Well, I was going to say we're going on almost 3 hours. So I was saying this is pretty good conversation, and maybe save it for another live coming up.
Sure.
I think she's saying, hey, by the way, boys, shut up. I'm ready to eat.
But
right.
before we did end this live, I did want to send out some free memberships from our Convicts Thoughts. So let me see if I can send some here really quick. I'm sending out 5 free memberships for Common Thoughts right now. So everybody in chat, let's see who YouTube gives it to.
I always love that. I don't own my own YouTube channel. Do you
Yes,
know
you
that,
do.
Lucky? I'm just the guy that gets on and rattles my brains and deals with the backlash and the haters. Jen actually runs and owns the show.
That's not true. It's all yours. I'm just here to try to help keep everybody on pace.
Lucky, why don't you throw out some of your shout outs and give us some ideas of things you're going to be working on. And
Thank you, Cheryl.
That way you can give some love to your crowd that's been here so graciously with us tonight. Almost got 800 people, Lucky, in the chat here.
Between the two,
It's awesome. I feel like I love this community. I think this community is just so cool. And it's so, it's refreshing to be able to come on here and just kind of talk about ideas. I noticed that, not everybody's going to agree. And not everybody's going to agree with my theories, and not everybody's going to agree with the things that I say. But I appreciate everybody, for the most part, being very respectful and sharing your ideas, because I do want to hear that. And I do want to hear, if you disagree with me, that's not a problem at all. You know, I that's why we do these. You know, we don't do these because we expect everybody to come on here and agree with everything that we're saying. We do this as a discussion so that we can all share our ideas. And you're not just sharing your ideas with us, but you're sharing your ideas with everyone in the chat. So that's why we do these, is so that everybody can get together, discuss some things, maybe correct some things, maybe offer some information. So I really I love this community, and it's always very interesting conversation. Like I said, I see a lot of the names that that I see all the time in my videos and in your videos and in your comment section and stuff. So I really love this community, and I want to say thank you to everyone who has signed up for memberships on my channel. I really appreciate it. And, you know, I'm going to begin doing members only lives every Wednesday. So originally I had said every other Wednesday, but I'm really just enjoying talking to y'all so much that we're going to start doing it every week. And I'm really excited about that. It's a smaller community, but it's the way I like it. It's perfect. We can all talk. We can all share our ideas. I'm able to kind of focus on your ideas and highlight your ideas. So I really appreciate that. And, you know, thank you to everybody who supports my channel and supports A Convict's Thoughts and Pity's Gone Stripping. Thank you to everybody who supports us. It means a lot. And, you know, when you're a small creator and you're putting your information out there and you're putting your ideas out there, it's not always easy. So it does make it a lot easier when you have such an awesome community. So I really appreciate all the support. We're about to hit 20,000 on my channel, so I'm really excited about that. Means a lot to me, and I truly appreciate every single one of you. Whether you agree with me or not, I appreciate you.
Absolutely. And that's why we have these discussions. You don't have to agree with everything, and you don't have to like everything. But as long as you're respectful, and, you know, if you want to share your opinions, that's great. As long as, you know, we're doing it respectfully, it's great. Good conversation is always, respectful conversation is always a good thing. Like, we don't have to hurt each other or lash out at each other just because somebody doesn't agree. You know, we're all here to learn. We're all here trying to find the truth.
Yeah, I'm almost at 11,700 subs, and I expect by morning I should be back down to about 9,000 or so. So it's pretty exciting times.
Yeah.
Well, and you know what? That's something else that, you know, I want people to know is that and I know that this is something that AR and I have both talked about, is we are going to start talking about other cases. And I know that, you know, we're looking into the New England, you know, serial killer. We're looking into Luigi Mangione. There's a lot of movement going on in that case right now. So I think I'm due to do some updates. And I know that AR is going to start really covering that. And I'm really curious about his insight on that case. And something else that I know that people have been asking for Brian Schaefer, the Brian Schaefer case. And I'm going to see if I can pull AR in with me on that one, because I think it's something that I want to kind of attack from the both of us, because it's a very interesting case. But it's just something that I really think will be more interesting with both of our input on that one.
Well, you threw that name out to me last night. It was kind of late in the evening, and I told you I'll get to it. And you know what? I spent about 2 hours looking into it last night already. So I do want to let people know that that is something that I believe I'm going to team up with you, Lucky, on. And I know we've had discussion too that even in the other cases, behind the scenes, we're going to do some work together, even though we're always going to stay strong to our communities and our channels and our content. We're going to work together some more behind the scenes to try to put out some together content. And that's one thing I do want to let people know. I am going to dive more into some of the members only work like Lucky, and hopefully Lucky will join me here or there. You know, when we're able to do it, mine would probably be on Sunday evenings. Jen would be here helping me, and I would love it if, you know, every once in a while I can sneak some of Lucky in on that as well for the members onlys. But, you know, Thursday evening this week, I'll be live with Murder Metal Mayhem. Pete, I know many of you guys love Pete. He did invite me to jump over with him, and I'm going to do the best I can because obviously I'm having surgery. No, tomorrow night's not members only, and not every live is going to be members only. I saw that already with the question marks. No, we're still going to be a lot of work, and it's going to be for everybody out there to be able to see. But tomorrow I go in for surgery, Lucky, and I appreciate you being so supportive of Jen and I when it comes to that. Jen's giving me the evil side eye, like it's time to go.
No, I'm not.
It just looks like that. Look at the computer screen. It looks like she's giving me this evil side eye. She's
I'm
probably
looking at the chat.
Yeah, she's probably looking at chat, but it just gives me this feeling like, oh, here we go. Tomorrow I have the first surgery, and then I've scheduled again the 13th. We're going to go back and forth between the eyes for a while. And I don't know how in depth this is going to get or really how long. I know when the doctor talked to Jen and I about the right eye, she made it sound like it's going to be a little bit of time that I'm down on that one.
Yeah, we'll see. I need to get more details.
I think I might even film some of it. Lucky.
We're not allowed to. That's the thing. All of the doctor's offices, and every time I go in, they say no recording, no filming, no nothing. Like they can literally boot you as a what's called a patient. And
when have I ever followed the rules? What are they going to do? Arrest me?
No, but they won't help you anymore.
I already got one damn video. I got snuck out. I could do more. No, but I just want to keep everybody involved in the healing process. But just so everybody knows, Jen and I will be talking with Lucky a lot. We'll be doing as much as we can to get work out. And if I'm on the sideline for a little bit, I'll be there to support both Lucky and Jen in the endeavor. And hopefully they can still do a live or two together while I'm out, that I can maybe just in the back of the scenes be helpful with in any way I possibly can. But definitely excited. We got a lot moving forward and new cases, and Idaho 4 will be on top of the trial as well. So everybody stay excited and Lucky. I'm going to leave it in your hands if you want to say our goodbyes and send us off, and we'll get out of here for the night. But I want to say thank you, everybody. That's my part. I'm out.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for being here. It means a lot. I mean, 3 hours, that's a long time. So we really appreciate your time, and it means a lot to everyone. It means a lot to me, AR, Jen. We really appreciate you a lot. And I guess that's about it. I hope that you all have a good night.
Absolutely.
All right. See you guys again soon. And you're live again on Wednesday, right, Lucky?
I will be live again on Wednesday. It's going to be a members only live, and I think we're going to be talking. I've had some suggestions from some members who want to talk about the physical aspect of what it would take for one perpetrator to commit this crime with 4 victims. So I think that's what we'll be talking about on Wednesday.
One of my very first videos I ever did on this case was actually taking on and off the gloves and the physicality of not only getting in the house, getting out of the house, the actual I even ran in place for a couple of minutes, Lucky. I mean, you ought to watch it. It got probably the most views of any of my videos. It's it's a stupid video, but but yeah, that should be a great live. We're going to look forward to watching that, and hopefully we see everybody there. You guys have a great night. Jen?
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We appreciate you. We will see you the next time we go live. Bye.
See you next time. Good night.